Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
I was already walking down Nevsky Lane, turning toward the road. A thin layer of snow streaked the sidewalk. Couples were walking past, warmly intertwined hands warmly warming each other. Grown men were hurrying home from work to their beloved wives and children. I was walking alone in the distance. Through a light haze of fog, I could see a trolleybus pulling away, grasping the bag on my shoulder so as not to lose it in the movement. I quickened my step. The doors were already closing, but one of the passengers asked the driver to wait. Entering the trolleybus, I shook my head from the flakes of snow and, thanking people for waiting, sat down on a vacant seat. Passing by a bridal salon, I smiled involuntarily. Recent memories of Charles came to mind. Soon I would marry the man half the town was in love with, whose face and name graced billboards and the most popular magazines. To the man who chose me over the 1,000 models surrounding him. Charles Vance is one of the richest men in our city, a businessman and sponsor of many orphanages, a man with a capital letter. We met 10 years ago, when I was still working as a teacher in an orphanage. He came there with his colleagues to present the orphans with numerous gifts. At first, he didn't even notice me, but I liked him almost immediately. A stately, tall, decent, handsome man, helping those in need. And if it hadn't been for his kind heart, perhaps we would never have met. I was jolted out of my thoughts by a sudden jolt. The trolleybus slowed, and several passengers moved forward. The bags of the woman sitting in front of me rolled toward the beginning of the transportation, knocking the unfamiliar man to the ground. Holding had not been taught. "Mother, do you want me to smash my head in here?" Grow pants from the wet snow that flew in. The exasperated man turned to the old woman. The same ran her eyes, but answered nothing. Standing up from her seat, the woman slipped, whether she was dragging 10 bags, and then could not hold on. On the face of the stranger appeared obvious dissatisfaction. He angrily kicked the lying bag, from which it tore, and the contents fell out directly onto the dirty floor. Seeing the confused woman, I jumped up sharply from my seat and approached the perpetrators of the noise. Respect for elders, you know what it is. My voice sounded confident, reflexive. I covered the old woman with my body. "Speak as you should." The surprised woman, whose gray strands peeked out from under a dark kerchief, threw down her eyebrows and looked out from behind me. The man was taken aback, but he was still aggressive. "Why are you meddling in other people's conversations?" His hard gaze went straight to my eyes, but I didn't back down. "I'm talking as I see fit. Let him watch his rags. I wish your children would talk to you the same way." I shouted, picking up the belongings of the poor woman who was the target of this ill-mannered tramp. The stranger shouted and headed for the exit. The other passengers watched the scene intently, not even trying to get into the fray. "Are you all right?" I gently stroked the woman's back and put her bags on the empty seat next to her. The old woman, as if still reeling from the situation, slowly sat down and looked at me with grateful eyes. "I'm fine, daughter. Thank you so much. You didn't have to fight with that fool for me." She motherly took my hand in her rusty but soft palms and smiled. "What's your name?" "I'm Kathy." I smiled back at the stranger and sat down across from her. "Is someone going to meet you?" "No, I'm fine." In truth, she nodded politely in acknowledgement of my worries. "My name is Camille. Let me write you the address. Come and have tea with me." "I'd be glad to, Camille." The old woman's eyes sparkled, as if one of her wishes had come true. That's when I turned to the window and saw the familiar houses. "Excuse me, this is my stop." I handed the crumpled woman a sheet of paper and a pen from my bag, so she could write her address for the next appointment. The woman happily wrote the street and house on the mirror in her jagged, barely legible handwriting, and gave me a glance. Stepping out of the trolleybus, I breathed in the fresh, frosty air, freeing myself from thoughts of that unpleasant insolence. Suddenly, there was an insistent sound. I reached deep into my bag, searching for the source of the ringing. Pulling out my phone, Charles popped up on the screen. Smiling happily, I picked it up. "Good evening." It was on the other end. "Hi," I answered, continuing toward the house. It had stopped snowing. The wind had died down, but the squeak from under my shoes gave away that I was outside. "You're still not home." Charles's voice became sharply agitated. "I would have picked you up from work if I'd known you'd be home so late. Don't worry about it. There was a lot to do today. I got off a little late, but I'm almost home now." As I stumbled, I cried out sharply, afraid I would fall. "Kathy, are you okay?" Charles on the other end of the phone was almost shouting, probably scared for me. "Charles, I'm not a child. I just tripped. I'm fine," I assured the man in a calm, slightly cheerful voice. "Let's meet tomorrow at lunch." My lover tiredly exhaled directly into the tube and spoke "Scare me well." "I'll pick you up at 1 o'clock. I'll be waiting for the meeting. Kisses to you too." I smiled, dropping the call even though I knew my man couldn't see me. He always told me about my beautiful smile. And when I see him or hear his voice, I'm immediately thrown into color. Even though he's busy, working and famous, Charles tries to give me all his free time. Of course, except for time with his family. He is the only child of his parents, who are already quite grown up, and often spends evenings with them. My lover has long offered to visit his family together, but I am still afraid that I did not like my future mother-in-law. I didn't consider myself a confident or well-mannered, or worse, some arrogant lady, but the fear of my future husband's mother still did not leave me. As it is customary since ancient times in most Russian families, mothers-in-law have a peculiar attitude to the wives of their sons, especially if they are the only heirs. Twirling the ring on the ring finger of my right hand, I took a nervous breath. Panic was building along with the feeling of familiarity approaching. After tidying up before bed, I lay down on the freshly made bed and pulled out my laptop. My thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I thought about how much I missed him, how much he missed me, how soon we could live together, how I would cook him dinner, how I would meet him after work, how he would hold me gently in his sleep and whisper about how much he was in love with me. Thinking back to how skeptical my family and friends had been about my relationship with one of the richest men in our city, I chuckled. They hadn't believed from the beginning that such a powerful, handsome, self-sufficient, and confident man could pay attention to someone like me. And what was my older sister's surprise, who had spent her whole life talking about how I wasn't good enough for the perfect husband. When she met Charles and me at a familiar restaurant in our neighborhood, Lisa had married when she was barely 20. She considered it a major accomplishment in her life and bragged about it left and right, saying things like, "I'll never achieve that." My mother and father were always supportive of the eldest daughter, continuing to trample on my own dignity, humiliating me with words, actions, and attitude. But I loved them despite their behavior towards me, respected them, helped them, and never turned my back on my family, no matter what. The ringing of the phone made me get out of bed and clear my thoughts of the echoes of the past. "It's ringing," I answered quietly. The rustling in the receiver alerted me. "Yes, I can come to you." A woman's barely audible and voice echoed on the other line. I nervously recognized the familiar voice. It was Lisa. "Lisa, are you okay? Why are you calling so late?" I asked worriedly. "Can I come over?" My sister asked again, trying to suppress the hoarseness in her voice, probably out of tears. I only said yes and waited impatiently for Lisa to arrive so I could finally find out what had caused such a late call and visit. Putting on my house robe, I went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and sat waiting for my big sister to arrive. I would never leave her or my parents in a time of need, no matter what our relationship was. Lisa hadn't called me in over a year, citing business, family, raising a son, and generally I'm the youngest and should call on my own. But now, at 12 o'clock in the morning, her voice spoke of something else. It begged for help, even though it didn't say so directly. Insistent. And I was already at the front door, taking the iron door away. And looking at my sister with a frightened look, I gasped, "What's wrong with you?" Before me, I saw not that cheerful, smiling and cheerful blonde girl I remembered, but depressed and clearly not caused. All frightened girl who covered her bare shoulders with only pain in such a bitter cold. "Kathy, I'm sorry. I have nowhere else to go." Her sister's voice was shaking herself. She was shivering, shifting from foot to foot. Lowering my eyes down, I noticed that Lisa was standing barefoot. I silently hugged my sister, and she nestled against my chest with desperation, encompassing me with her cold, skinny arms. Without a word, I led Lisa into the kitchen, sitting her down at the table. I went to get my things, choosing the most appropriate clothes. There were 1,000 thoughts brewing in my head, but one of them was the one that most resembled the truth. Her husband, a cruel tyrant, had kicked her out of the house without even a chance to dress. And I was seething with anger that some jerk could treat my sister like that, even though they have a child together. "And I'll pour you some hot tea." I handed my sister warm socks and a cozy sweater, and I headed for the supervisor's office. My hands were shaking, whether from worry for a loved one or for injustice to my sister. Lisa tapped her nails nervously on the table, looking away from me and toward the door. "Drink." I handed my sister a mug of hot chamomile tea, hoping it would calm her down a little. I tried to catch her gaze, but it was in vain. She was looking anywhere but into my eyes. "Explain to me what happened." "I apologize to you, Kathy." Lisa sobbed and then broke into sobs, occasionally gasping from her own hysterics, and put my arm around her shoulders, gently stroking her back. Words wouldn't have helped here, so I tried to soothe my sister only with actions. After a while, we moved into the room. Lisa was curled up on the bed, staring at the door without taking her eyes off it. "Can you tell me?" "I won't tell my parents anything, Lisa." My voice was quiet, but my sister heard me. "He kicked me out. He cheated on me and kicked me out." My eyes were still fixed on one point. Only my voice sounded hoarse and detached. "John said he was going to take my son away from me." My eyes widened, and I was visibly nervous. Even though I rarely saw my nephew, I loved him, and I wasn't ready for him to be in the hands of this fool in love, even if his parents moved away. "He needs to stay with his mother." Even though Lisa was not a very good friend and older sister, she treated motherhood with awe and love. And Liam loved his mom too much. When Lisa married, John seemed to everyone to be a fairly adequate, fun, and loving man. But his behavior at that moment kept me on my toes. I tried to warn my sister, but my word against my dad and mom and my sister's crush meant absolutely nothing. Perhaps situations like this had happened before, but I was not privy to them, just like my parents, because the Smith family was always set as an example to me that one should be just like Lisa, find a man like John, and live happily ever after in the communal living quarters of her husband's late mother. Now that Lisa is completely devastated and exhausted, bereft of the will to live, lying in my home not knowing what to do with her tyrant husband, my fears from 10 years ago have been confirmed. He is not worthy to be my sister's husband. And despite the fact that Liam loves his father, he is not worthy to be the one. I can talk to a lawyer I know. Will you be divorced? Will Liam stay with you? I whispered, hoping to rouse my sister. She only looked up at me, waving her head in denial. I love him. We just need to make up, Lisa whispered, covering herself with a blanket. Stunned, I jumped out of bed and spread my arms. You're crazy, Lisa. That man has no respect for you. If he cheats, he doesn't love you. He's blackmailing you with his son. You have the right to go outside in 30-degree cold, without shoes or clothes. And you're still talking about love. My eyes blurred and my thoughts were filled with hatred for my son-in-law. I wanted to protect my sister and do everything I could so that this rude man would no longer be able to hurt the one I loved. Lisa didn't say anything, only occasional sobs, sluggishly hiding her face under the bed. Liam at her parents asked me rudely. Receiving a nod in response, I exhaled quietly, knowing that my nephew was okay, one of the main tasks at the moment. After waiting for my sister to fall asleep, I headed to the kitchen, made myself a strong tea, and sat down with myself. What to do? What to do? Should I tell the family? Should I call the lawyer in secret from my sister? Or maybe have a conversation with John so that he realizes his mistake? My thoughts were jumbled with questions in them, and after sitting at my desk for over an hour, I didn't notice how I fell into a dream right behind him. I woke up to my neck stiff and my arms aching from resting against the hard surface of the dining table all night. Sighing heavily, I got situated and headed to the bathroom to shower and wash off the remnants of last night's horrible night of biting myself into terry towels. I quietly entered the room and stared in amazement at the removed bed, which no longer had my sister on it. Only a torn sheet from my work notebook caught my eye. Thank you for taking me in at this hour and at such a difficult time. I'll take care of my problems. Don't worry yourself. With gratitude, Lisa. As in childhood unbearable, I muttered to myself under my breath as soon as I read the note. I didn't expect anything more from my sister, knowing the dislike she had for me. I smiled warmly as I ran my fingers over the uneven letters on the sheet. She'd left me notes like that when I was a teenager. Usually she asked me to cover for her in front of her parents while she ran off to discos and boyfriends. And at the end, there was always a threat to make sure I didn't screw her over in front of her father and mother. Lisa didn't know how to thank for help, no matter what it was. She might have wanted to, but she couldn't because of her pride, her temper. She didn't like to show weakness. I missed my family, but I wasn't sure if they did. That's why I visited Mom and Dad so rarely, and my sister even less often. Glancing at my watch, I realizing that I was already late for work. In a hurry, I grabbed my bag and keys from the nightstand and left the apartment, leaving my gloomy thoughts behind. After greeting my colleagues, I went to my office to do the paperwork for the children whose parents would soon be coming to pick them up. For a year, I have been the head of the orphanage, where I started working as a teacher. When I opened the first file, I laughed. It was said that Vaughn would never be taken too naughty, and now I found a mother for Zurianov. Having attached the photo to the sheet, I continued my work. There was a knock at the office, and he came in. John. I was surprised to see my son-in-law on the doorstep. Where's Sliska? He didn't even deign to say hello. Dark-haired man began to ask questions to me. Why do I know whose wife is mine? Deciding not to specify where exactly his wife spent that night, I answered with a question I know that she called you at night. John stepped up to my desk and fixed his angry gaze directly on me. The door behind him swung open, and Charles walked in. The situation had reached a fever pitch, and it was urgent to save the day. But how? I had no idea. Charles, it's okay. I gave the man I loved a calm look so he wouldn't worry about me. Where's Lisa? John asked again, already pounding his fist on the keyboard on the table. She flew off to the side, taking the pile of papers with her. I squirmed, afraid of getting caught in the hot hand of my angry son-in-law, but I pulled myself together and answered firmly. I do not know where your wife. Look elsewhere. Charles quietly approached John from behind, put his heavy palm on his shoulder, squeezing weakly. I beg you not to frighten my beloved with your rash actions. The vein on Charles's forehead stirred, and his hand clutched my son-in-law's jacket more and more tightly. Look for your wife not in Butova. It has come to this. Otherwise, I'll have to intervene. The ardor, you see, immediately cooled down. He raised his head to look at Charles. He was at least 30 centimeters taller than him. Nervously, with a gulp, he turned to me. If she shows up, tell her I regret what I did. Finishing his speech, John gave me another glance. Charles with a displeased look and left my office. I exhaled heavily, falling into my desk chair. My thoughts were immediately filled with Lisa. If John had come to my place, then my sister's parents didn't have her either. Where could she have gone? Panic came over me imperceptibly, but a gentle hand tracing patterns across the back of my palm gave me a drop of calm. Who was it? What had happened? My favorite. Charles kissed my temple and kept his warm, moist lips on my skin for a while to reassure me and let me breathe easy. He knew better than anyone how to bring me to my senses. It's all about support. I need to know that someone is there to support me, whether I'm right or wrong. I just need someone who will lend a shoulder in times of need and not leave me halfway. In the difficult times of my life. Remember Lisa, the one we met at the restaurant? My fiancé nodded approvingly. That's her husband. She showed up at my door last night barefoot, naked, a year after we last met. He kicked her out, promised to take the baby, and this morning there was no sign of her. I thought she'd gone home or gone to her parents' house, but now I'm confused as to where my sister might be. Plunged into the most negative outcomes of events lying at the bottom of my heart. The panic was building again. In my chest, she could be anywhere. She has no friends, no more relatives. Anything could have happened to her. And the worst part was that she could bring the trouble on herself. Kathy, don't worry. I'll call my contacts and we'll find her as soon as possible. Charles touched my arm and turned me toward him. I buried my nose in his broad chest and cried quietly. Throughout our relationship, I'd never shown my feelings about my family in front of him. I was always afraid of judgment on his part. Why am I so careless of the people who raised me? And why am I so reluctant to talk about my older sister? So the topic of my family was rarely broached. And if we did talk about her, I told her that everyone close to me was doing well, feeling great. I wasn't lying to her, because Charles was the closest thing to me. After a few minutes, I pulled myself together, and after seeing the man I loved that I was fine, I headed to the principal's office to ask for time off. I frantically dialed my mom's number to ask when the last time she had seen Lisa and to see if she knew what was going on between her favorite daughter and son-in-law. "Mom, hi," I whispered, trying to hide the anxiety in my voice. "Kathy, terrific. Muja." In a voice I immediately realized John brought her nervously out of my eyes, back into my head. I tried to put together the right sentence, so as not to scare my mom even more and not to set my sister up. After all, I had made a promise not to tell my parents about what happened yesterday. "Mom, is Lisa home?" I asked. "Daughter, we can't find her." She turned off her phone. John panicked. "Liam, so Mom wants to see her." Mom tried to hold on, not to cry, but I could feel her motherly heart howling with pain and incomprehension. Where is her daughter now? For a second, I wondered, what about me? Mom had never baked like this, but there was no time for that sentimentality now. So I immediately put all that nonsense out of my head. "Don't worry, Charles will get some people on it and we'll find her," I reassured my mom. The silence in the phone alarmed me. I added, "John came to see me too. I'm very worried too. Thanks for your help, Kathy." Really, Mom's voice had leveled off and she seemed to be squeezing the phrase out of her. Thanking, as Mom used to say, an ungrateful daughter. Apparently, it's not very easy. I just remained silent and dropped the call. Charles, meanwhile, was waiting for me in my office, at the same time calling his friends and the police. I told him what clothes Lisa had left with and where she might be. "We'll find her," Charles said affirmatively and offered to drive me home to my parents' house. I didn't feel like driving, and I couldn't really help them at the moment. I decided to think at home about where Lisa could go to escape her husband's tyranny and threw off my heavy winter coat. I went straight to the kitchen. My stomach grumbled, demanding at least some food, because I hadn't eaten or drunk anything since last night except tea, which I'd fallen asleep with. Cut myself a salad. I proceeded to eat, at the same time contemplating my sister's act. She'd run away from life, from cheating, from her parents. But she would never run away from her own child, leaving it in the care of John. The act was justified only because her husband's tyranny had driven her to a nervous breakdown. Yesterday she had acted distant, as if pondering what could save her from all that was happening. A memory flashed through her mind. "Daddy, I love him, don't I?" shouted Lisa, hiding behind my skinny back, standing right between the two lights of the disco with the bandit. Some people call it love. My father took a swing at my sister, So we both reflexively pressed against each other. "You're not even 18 yet, and you're already here and loving me," you say. Lisa, embittered, glared at Dad, turned around and left the apartment, slamming the door. I, grabbing my jacket off the rack, rushed after her. The pouring rain prevented me from seeing her silhouette in the darkness. I stumbled but kept running, hoping to stop my sister. I couldn't let her walk around alone at night in this cold, rainy weather. Lisa shrieked as I entered an abandoned, dilapidated building not far from our house. Echoes echoed throughout the room. Already soggy yellow leaves lay on the floor. The bricks impeded forward movement, and the hum of the birds scared the hell out of me. Walking a little farther, I noticed a shadow sitting on the windowsill, resting its nose in my lap. Lisa shouted again to get her older sister's attention. "It's cold here. Let's go home." The girl raised her head silently, and I came closer and threw the jacket I had taken over her shoulders. We sat in the dark, and only the light of a street lamp in the next street gave us some illumination. The silence was soothing, thoughts felt. The fresh, cold air gave us a chance to breathe. My sister quietly rested her head on my shoulder and sobbed. "Don't tell anyone about this place." I, fleeing here from the pain, whispered to Lisa and continued to stare into the darkness. I immediately jumped up from the table and started rushing around the kitchen. Is she really there in the winter? I asked myself. My sister hid there from pain, from family, from judgment. And most likely, she remembered this place at such a difficult moment for her. Grabbing my phone, I immediately called Charles and asked him to take me to the place, making him promise not to tell anyone about it. Even after 13 years, I wished I could keep that little big sister secret. We drove at breakneck speed, outrunning the cars ahead of us. Charles pressed the gas to the floor, recognizing that we might find my Lisa. "You asked confidently." Charles took my hand and gave me a warm look. I nodded and squeezed his fingers in my palm. As I drove up to the ruined building, my heart sank. I was afraid to see the worst possible outcome there. Afraid that my sister might have done something irreversible. "I'll do it myself," I told Charles, stopping him just before the entrance. Walking down the familiar path, I froze, hoping for the best. Turning in the right direction, I exhaled with ease. Lisa was sitting on the very windowsill by the cats in the plate she had apparently taken from my house. I walked quietly over to her so as not to startle her with my presence, sat down next to her, and gave her a sisterly hug around the shoulders. She knew I was coming. She felt it, so she wasn't the least bit afraid. "For so many years I humiliated you, always telling you that you wouldn't be happy because of your soft nature. Mocked you." Her tear-red eyes rose guiltily at me. "But only you came for me. Me, your sister Lisa." The veil slowly made my pupils. "I will always be there for you, even when you can't see it." She clutched her frost-dried hands into my coat and cried quietly. It wasn't as hysterical as yesterday, but it too was full of pain and fear. I ran my hand through her blonde hair, pulling her close to me. Pearls of tears dripped from my eyes, coating the plate with wet spots. My sister didn't push away, only harder. The two strong-spirited women outside, showing their hatred for each other, sat and cried together, helping to heal, to shake the drops off their cheeks. I turned to my sister. "Come, I'll take you to my place. You get back to normal, and we'll go through with the divorce and pick up Liam. Thanks for your help. I've really missed you all these years," thankfully giving me a smile. Lisa rose from the cold surface. We headed to the car, where an excited Charles was obediently waiting for me. Seeing me and my sister, who was in a not-so-good state, he nodded understandingly and silently opened the door for my sister. We drove in silence, listening to the radio at minimum volume, so as not to disturb the already sleeping Lisa in the back seat. I turned occasionally and looked at my sister warmly. No matter how much we fight or what we say to each other, we are sisters, and our bond is unbreakable, even through a dozen years from driving us and going home. "Rest. Did you do a lot to help me find her too?" I whispered, so as not to wake Lisa. "You're welcome." She's part of my future family, after all. Charles smiled and kissed the back of my palm. I blushed angrily and gave him a look full of love and gratitude for everything he'd done for me. We walked into the house with Lisa, and she immediately went to rest. She wanted to go see her son, but I assured her that he was fine. After texting my mom that Lisa was fine and she was with me, I decided to rest too. I ran a bath, prepared a glass of white wine that was left over from my birthday party. I turned on a movie and started to enjoy the atmosphere. I was finally able to fully relax and feel light for the last 2 days. The water was dyed a soft pink color from the bath bomb I had used. The lather enveloped my feet, and I enjoyed watching the action of the movie. Again, that annoying ringing of the phone broke the idyll I was in. Christina popped up on the screen as the director called. Immediately, bad thoughts arise in my head. Wiping my hands on a towel, I answered the call. "Kathy, we have an emergency." The excited voice of the headmistress scared me terribly. "What's happened?" "Vahan is in the hospital, in intensive care. His psychologist-to-be mother is here, away on family business. There's a whole mess going on." The tone was getting louder. In the background could be heard a woman's terrified scream and voices trying to calm her down. "I'll be there soon," I replied and ran to pack in a hurry. I had to wait longer than usual for a cab. My head was wet. The wind was blowing in my ears. I froze to the bone while I waited for the car in the driveway. I raced to the orphanage. Without even taking off my outerwear, I ran to Christina's office. "Tell me, what hospital is he in?" "He's my son," shouted Emily, grabbing our principal by the blouse. Even looked as scared as possible. "Emily, get a hold of yourself. We're going to sort this out now," I interjected into the furious woman's monologue. She was crying and screaming at the same time. She shifted her already tired, heavy look at me and sank down on a chair. "We will go to the hospital together with you now, but on one condition." The woman listened to me attentively, and as soon as I told her about a possible meeting with him, she literally lit up. "I'll talk to the doctor. But you must understand the adoption papers are not ready yet, and you are not yet his full parent. The closest people are usually allowed in an IQ, so I'll do what I can," I concluded. "Encourage Emily." She nodded. I asked her to wait for me outside the office for just a few minutes. After learning all the details of Safin's case, we went to the hospital together with the expectant mother. The woman sitting behind the wheel of her car looked confused. Her eyes were staring into the void. Her hands were shaking and her heart was clearly bleeding. Vahan was not her blood child, though, and she had wanted to take him away long past the age of an infant. Emily loved this venturesome, cheerful little boy with all her soul, and Ilyusha, always hearing her voice, ran from the farthest room into the hall to chat with his mother for a minute. With each meeting, they grew warmer and warmer toward each other. The love grew, and so did the affection. So it was very hard to look at a depressed Emily, who had just found happiness and was afraid of losing it again. He would be fine. I supported the woman. Elisi died when he was 8, just like Ilyusha. Emily suddenly spoke. "If the same thing happens to me that happened 7 years ago, I will not forgive myself. You didn't mention this moment when you applied for adoption," I answered, looking into the woman's face. "Mentally, I'm completely healthy, and I don't see any similarities between him and my late son. I just want to feel like a mother again and give this beautiful boy a better future." She slowed down, giving such details. "I'm afraid my heart can't take another loss this serious. Kathy, I want to love and be loved." I nodded understandingly and stroked the woman's shoulder. She waved the tears from her cheeks and fixed her quail strands that were getting in the way on the road. When we reached the hospital, we went straight to the medic who had left in the ambulance with Savina. "Sophia, how is he?" I asked, addressing a young girl sitting near the entrance to the intensive care unit. The doctor said he would only talk to higher-ups. He didn't tell me anything. Sophia lowered her head guiltily, occasionally sobbing. Leaving Emily with the nurse, I found the doctor and he led me to his office. "The boy has had a serious poisoning. He's fine now, but if he suddenly worsens, I'll have to go to the police, the doctor concluded. Where in your facility could a child find alcohol? What? What are you talking about? My eyes widened in surprise. He had over half a liter of hard liquor in his system. The child drank it in one gulp. What caused the poisoning? For his age, it's almost a lethal dose, the doctor replied, looking at me unhappily. And I heard you. We will deal with this situation. The boy is not easy, always found adventure. What could possibly go into his head? I answered confidently, hiding my shaking hands under the table. His foster mom can see him. His adoption papers are being processed. I can't present them right now. But if he meets with his mom, he'll obviously feel better. He shouldn't be nervous or moving for more than 3 minutes. He's conscious, but he's in serious condition. For his age, a nurse will see you out. Tell me, did Filatov authorize it? Disgruntled doctor threw and again ducked into a pile of papers on his desk, and I thanked him and hurried to rejoice Emily. Soon the woman was escorted to the boy, and I stayed behind to wait for her. Remembering the wonderful 15 minutes of quiet time I'd had in the bathroom brought a warmth to me. I too was worried about Alyosha, and the woman's life situation touched me too. But I wondered if anyone was wondering what was going on inside me and worrying about something joyful for me. Emily came out of the room and came straight to me. Kathy, thank you so much for your help. If it wasn't for you, I would be torturing myself with scary and frightening thoughts. But I am now 100% sure that my baby will live. Without a moment's hesitation, the woman took me into her arms. I reciprocated and wished her son a speedy recovery. Sophia, having finally learned about the baby's condition, went home, and Emily decided to drive her. I hope I get credit for this, she chuckled to herself. I headed outside, putting my hand in my pocket. I frowned, fumbling for a piece of paper. Unfolding the piece of paper, I smiled. It was the address of the very nice grandma from the trolley bus. Looking at my watch, I decided to visit her and thus free my thoughts from the negativity that had accumulated over the past few days. I knocked meekly on the door, waiting for my landlady. The door was opened by a stately man, probably a little older than Camille. He looked at me perplexed and later asked, "Who don't believe in God? We're not buying vacuum cleaners." "Excuse me, I'm here to see Camille." An old lady looked out of the man and immediately broke into a smile. She owed me a mug of tea. "Kathy, you made it," exclaimed the woman from the food man aside, thereby throwing him out of his stupor. She gave me a motherly hug and motioned for me to come in. "This is Kathy. Remember I told you I rode in the trolley. She was the one who protected me," Camille said proudly, helping me take off my coat. Grandpa hesitated at first, but later he smiled too and extended his hand to introduce me. "I'm Kevin." The nice man led me into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Camille, on the other hand, started to take out cookies, nuts, and jam. I felt at ease and chatted happily with Kevin while his wife set the table. "So you're an educator too?" The man spoke excitedly as soon as he learned that I had studied at a teacher training university. "My Camille is also a teacher. She used to teach Russian. Really, it was my favorite subject in school," I exclaimed, eating the pie Camille had given me. We chatted nonstop, discussing every possible topic. The old woman was pouring and already on his third mug, and our conversations did not end. "Do you already have children?" the woman asked, looking at me without any shyness. I waved my head negatively. "We have only a son, and that too from an orphanage, but ours." There was an awkward silence in the air. I decided to lighten the mood. "Mom didn't give birth like that, but brought him up like that." I took the woman's hand and stroked the back of it with my other hand. She smiled. We didn't bring up the subject of children again, but there was still a little tension. Seeing through the window that it was already dark outside, I decided I should head home. Lisa had probably come to her senses by now, and Charles was ripping off my phone because I had set it to silent in mode. "Thank you, Kevin and Camille. You helped me out. I feel better after sitting with you guys. I hugged those nice people and headed for the bus stop. After dialing Charles' number, I waited for an answer. I've called you 15 times, Kathy 15. Charles' voice was rather gruff, but excited at the same time. I put the phone on silent. A kid was hospitalized at work. I replied guiltily. I'm sorry. Charles stammered a cough and answered I didn't realize that something serious had happened. I was really worried. I understand. I think about you a lot. A ridiculous silence formed after these words. I miss you. I love you too. His velvet voice made me smile. I love you and hope to see you soon. I love you, I replied and reluctantly hung up the phone. As I got on the trolleybus, I fell asleep instantly, forgetting all my problems. When I woke up 2 stops before my stop, I put on my hood and waited for the transportation to slow down. The house smelled like childhood. Taking off my coat, I walked into the kitchen and found my sister in there, diligently chopping vegetables while dancing to the music on the speaker. You're back. Where have you been? Did you leave the bathtub with water? Lisa asked. A smile was visible on her face. The beauty had gone from her eyes, and she looked quite awake. It smells. Here are the horns, I said, walking to the table. I had things to do. Didn't get into it at work. I see you're feeling better. I made up with my favorite sister. Soon, getting rid of the tyrant husband. What could be better, my dear? Laughing, Lisa replied, putting the ingredients for the salad into a bowl. Thought I'd treat myself to your favorite food. Saw cottage cheese in the fridge, so I made some rusks. Are you happy? I nodded without further ado and pulled my arms around the girl. For a tight hug, she came over, and we were reunited. Just like when we were kids, to old songs and the smell of cotton candy wafting through the apartment. We lost track of time, chatted nonstop, remembering the past and telling the present. In my sister's eyes burned the very fire that John had once extinguished in them. I left the waddles, drinking my tea, and listened intently to my sister. She was excitedly telling me how her son was growing up, how he resembled me as a child, how she missed me in the difficult moments of her life, despite her attitude toward me in the past. I was glad that this particular person had come back into my life somewhere in the back of my mind. My inner child cried tears of joy that at 28 years old, he had found a big sister. Lisa looked back at my facial features with admiration, occasionally touching my hair. She saw herself in me. And though we weren't alike in personality, we were insanely similar in appearance. Dark as coal, hair as thick as coal, beautiful eyebrows and brown eyes like the core of a planet that you wanted to drown in. We achieved each other's love, which we were very happy about. Now at 2 o'clock in the kitchen, drinking tea together, I woke up to movement next to me. Lisa turning in different directions, almost pushing me out of bed. I lost my eyes and stared at the clock 7:30 in the morning. There was literally half an hour left to sleep, but I decided not to tease my body and grudgingly swore by the bathtub. Even at this early hour, nothing could spoil my mood. I took a shower, did the necessary facials, and decided to curl my thick black hair. After half an hour of torture, I had a charming style on my head. I could wear it to a wedding. I heard behind me. A sleepy Lisa was smiling in the doorway, looking at me. Oh, come on. I laughed, applying balm to my lips. I have to be irresistible at a wedding. I always do. My sister gently ran her hand over my back and went to take a shower. After packing, I went to work while sending a good morning message to my favorite man. Yesterday, I felt ashamed for forgetting about him and making him worry in hopes that today would pass without incident. I was thinking about having a romantic dinner with Charles this evening. Walking into work, I received tons of compliments on my hair filled with color. I headed to my office. There was the most unexpected surprise waiting for me that I never imagined. Noah, what are you doing here? I asked in surprise, staying close to the door. It's good to see you too, Kathy. The man smiled wryly and walked over to me. I'm not. Why did you come here? Shaking hands betrayed my indignation at that. I took a step back. My first, but also my hardest love, the one I'd spent years trying to forget, was sitting in my office, sprawled on a chair in a masterly manner. It's been 7 years since we last met, and on that fateful day I hoped I'd never see his smug face again. But fate thought otherwise. Don't be afraid. I came not to Kathy, who was head over heels in love with me, but to the head of Kathy's orphanage. His grin never left his lips even now. For as long as I could remember, he'd always been such a narcissistic, arrogant kid. But I guess he'd gotten a hold of me in my 20s, and our breakup was torture for me. What you need? I took off my coat and snapped at him. You haven't changed a bit. You're still beautiful, slender, bold. Noah gave me an animalistic look and smiled. Noticing my glare, he continued, my wife has a soft spot for kids without families. I'd like to sponsor your institution. 3rd floor, 2nd door on the left. You want to see the director? Through my teeth I sneered, trying to distract myself, and looked at the personal files on my desk. And they said that sponsors are handled by you, especially Vance. Hearing the last name of my favorite person out of his mouth, my fists clenched involuntarily. I jumped up from my seat and pointed my finger at the door. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My thoughts are all jumbled up. I don't know what I'm saying. Bracker hesitated, throwing me into a stupor. I've never seen him so lost. A moment ago, his sneers and chuckles filled the office, but now his confidence was gone. My wife is dying. The man blurted out. He touched every object on my desk to keep his hands busy. What are you talking about? Sitting back down, I asked. You're supposed to know what true love is, right? He asked sharply, raising his guilty eyes to me. I nodded. I met her 3 years ago. She's young, confident, and her eyes are like an ocean you want to drown in. He spoke of his wife with admiration, as if she were something impossible, beyond the reach of ordinary people. 2 months ago, we found out she had cancer. Terminal brain cancer. His gray eyes filled with tears. Nerves made him drop the magnet he'd grabbed from my pencil case. She had dreamed of children, but now she asked me to give all her savings to orphanages, so I did. Now she wants me to sponsor at least one orphanage in her memory. I covered my eyes, trying not to feel the pain. What is Noah feeling right now? I didn't know what it was like to know that your love could leave you at any second. But now, looking at someone whose eyes are already tired of crying, whose hands are already down, I can see how hard it is. I want her name to hang on your wall of honor for the rest of her days, to be immortalized here. It embedded itself in my heart as well. An innocent tear fell from my eyes as I listened to Noah's story about his wife. I forgot about the pain this man had caused me. I pulled myself together and was willing to help him with the paperwork for the long-term sponsorship to make this all go faster. I will do my best to get it all set up. Go to the director and submit the paperwork as soon as possible, and leave me a picture and your wife's information. All funds coming from you will be recorded in her name, I concluded. I hope for the best. Noah, thank you so much for your help, Kathy. He looked at me so warmly and tenderly that I wanted to support him. I walked over to my former lover and hugged him. Hang in there, I said and looked at the man. At that moment, I realized that life could turn 360 degrees in a split second, with no way to turn back. Noah looked as if he were dead. When he talked about his beloved, even men like him can love so much that they would do anything for someone whose heart beats only for him. I immediately texted Charles about how much I loved him and was afraid of losing him. People need to know that they are loved. They need to feel it because there is no telling what will happen tomorrow. Charles immediately called me to ask what had happened. I briefly explained the situation, and he invited me to dinner that evening. Inspired by tonight's date, I continued to work. By the end of the day, I was mentally looking forward to meeting my lover. I wanted to finally embrace him, breathe in his wonderful scent, and talk to him. There was a knock at the door. Charles came in with a huge bouquet of chrysanthemums, which I love so much. "Oh my God, they're beautiful," I exclaimed, accepting the gift. "Not as pretty as you, but still." Charles smiled and kissed my cheek. I flushed and, laying the flowers on the table, threw myself into the arms of the man I loved. His scent of pine and wood drove me crazy whenever I was near him. "I missed you so much," my fiancé said quietly, pulling me close to him. "Let's go, we're late." And I, smiling with all my 32 teeth, threw on my coat and hurried happily after Charles. Once at the restaurant where Charles had reserved a table for us, I relaxed, ordering a bottle of wine and a variety of entrees. We proceeded to dinner, talking about everything in the world. He was a suave, gentle, confident man. I felt safe with him. When we are together in an informal setting, I always feel sleepy, which means I have the right person with me. Charles is the one who will follow me wherever I go, support me whenever I go, and help me wherever I go. Our love grows stronger every day, even when we don't see each other. I feel it subconsciously. Charles raised his blue eyes to me, and I froze. "I proposed to you so long ago. Maybe it's time to get serious," Charles asked. Why did I hesitate? "What are you talking about?" I asked back. "Tomorrow's a day off. I'm going to my parents. Maybe you can visit them with me." Charles looked in my eyes for agreement, but all he saw was wine. "I'm sorry, I'd love to." "Really?" I was silent. He was still waiting for me to continue. "I want to deal with my sister and brother-in-law, do the paperwork, and wait for Vaughn to be discharged. I feel responsible for all of this. I want to go to your family with a pure heart. But that's obviously not right now." Charles nodded understandingly, but at the same time resentfully, and continued eating his steak. After a couple minutes of silence, he did speak. "You always think of others first. When are you going to start thinking about yourself?" I was running out of time, appearing as a piece of beef. When I heard those words, I knew that Charles was right now more than anyone else. But I couldn't abandon my sister to her fate. I promised to help her with her divorce and her son. The story of Vaughn and his mother is also a sad one. And my happiness is probably not as important as their grief. It's the same situation with Bracker. I was afraid to lift my head and look into my fiancé's face, because he's waiting for me to be ready to meet his family so he can start preparing for the wedding. And I, with my overly kind heart, am doing anything but my personal life. I'm sorry, Charles, but that's who I am. I take responsibility for what I do. After finishing my glass of wine, I grabbed my purse and left the room without saying goodbye. The frost was getting colder, and I wanted to wait for the trolley. But I decided it would be more comfortable and faster to take a cab. Charles took his time getting out to stop me. He knew I needed to cool down and be alone with my thoughts. When I turned around, I saw a familiar figure standing at the entrance to the restaurant I'd just left. "Mom," I shouted, hoping my eyesight was failing me. My mom, dressed in a gorgeous burgundy dress and brown mink coat, was chatting sweetly with a man unknown to me. She turned around startled at my voice, and as soon as she saw me, she grabbed her conversation partner under the arm and walked into the establishment. I waved my head, referring to my inebriated mind, and I thought I had imagined it. The cab stopped, and I deftly jumped into the car. "I give you my address." When I got home, I didn't find my sister. A puzzle was forming in my head. I frantically dialed my sister's number and paced around the apartment, waiting for her to answer. "Lisa, hi. Where are you?" I asked. "My mom called, asking me to come over. She had to leave on business." "Don't worry, I'm fine," my sister replied. In the background, I heard my father's laughter and Liam's children's voices. "Is Mom okay?" Abruptly, I spoke up. Sister only said they were fine and invited me to visit, which I declined. Again, a pile of questions. Why was Mom at that restaurant? Did Dad know what she was doing there? And who was that mysterious man next to her? My temples were burning. The feeling of my brain melting wouldn't leave me. I was nervous. I couldn't find my place. I didn't even know what it was that was making me question myself so much. Cheating is my biggest fear. But cheating on your mother with your father is worse than if it happened to me. I couldn't take it any further, so I called my mom. "Mom, good evening." My voice sounded pretty rough. "Hello, daughter." My mom's gentle voice alarmed me. The last time she had called me daughter was over 15 years ago, not counting the latest situation involving Lisa's disappearance. "Where are you now? Can we meet?" I decided to ask the question right up front. "I can come to your place after the big meeting." My mom threw me the text address and immediately disconnected. I looked at the faded screen and waved my head. "No way," I said to myself. She hadn't been to my house once since I'd moved away from them. I hurriedly texted the address to my mom and waited for her almost at the front door. Charles hadn't called, but I was worried about him, even though it wasn't a good time. So much had happened in the last few days that my head was bursting with trying to find answers to all the questions in it. More than an hour and a half passed, and still I sat in the kitchen waiting for my mother. The doorbell rang, and I ran to open the burgundy dress, and brown fur coat in my heart unpleasantly shook, and I became even more nervous than before. "Come in," I said dryly and moved toward the kitchen. Mom took off her outer garments without a trace of shame, and I noticed how deep her cleavage was. "At such an advanced age, I know what you want to talk to me about." Mom sat down across from me, not even bothering to hug her daughter. "No matter how I feel about my father, he's still my father." "How can you do that?" I raised my tone sharply without breaking eye contact with my mother. "You should have listened first," risked my mother's stern voice. I slowly lowered myself into the chair and raised my eyebrows questioningly. "Your father has huge debts with nothing to pay," Mom concluded, watching my reaction. This meeting at the restaurant could cover them once and for all. I rounded my eyes and didn't even know what to say to that. I didn't want to know what exactly Mom was up to, but I wanted to get this masquerade over with as soon as possible. "The amount of the debt," I blurted out, not waiting for the story to continue. Mom looked at me in surprise. $1,500. The woman cut me off, as if to tell me, "How can you help me? I'll give you this money, and you finish your meetings with strange men." My nerves were fraying, my palms were sweating, and I wanted to get rid of company like my mother. She didn't comment on my words in any way, but I could see on her face that she was dumbfounded as much as I was. I walked to the bedroom and pulled an envelope called "wedding" from the nightstand. I had been saving money for it, knowing Charles was rich, but I wanted to contribute to our shared event. Holding out exactly $1,500 to my mother, I spoke. "Tell your father the relatives helped or sold some gold. Don't say I gave it." Mom's eyes glistened, and she lowered her head. Something inside her ached. Seeing a mother crying, even a mother like that, is very hard. I wanted to hug her, kiss her, and tell her that I still loved her. But my pride was greater than my weakness in front of my loved ones, especially when they care so much about you and your family. "Thank you for your help, daughter," my mom whispered and looked guiltily into my eyes. She left my abode. I slowly slid down the wall to the floor and cried. I couldn't stop mine. The tears came. There was a lump in my throat. My head was bursting with migraines. She left without just saying thank you, without asking how I was, without asking what was wrong with me, without telling me how much she missed me, how much she loved the one she used to walk around like that as a child. Or Layla. I was ready to scream from that one, but I was also aching inside from the reanimated wounds inside that my own mother had inflicted on me. I had emptied myself completely over the last week of my life. My mind began to leave me, my body, and I lost consciousness. Waking up from the sunlight, I didn't realize where I was at first. Then, coming to my senses, I looked around. My head was still splitting open. Drinking a painkiller, I cleaned myself up and decided to distract myself from bad thoughts with work. There was no desire to communicate with anyone, and after just checking Messenger for messages, I pulled out my laptop to check the archive of old Fosters. Christina had instructed me to look for a child named Charles, and I set about checking the personnel files that we had only recently converted to electronic form. My eyes were blind, but I kept searching lest I fall asleep and think of those who were not thinking of me at all. Nervously flipping through my files, I caught a glimpse of a familiar birth date, 17080. I smiled, remembering Charles. I took a picture of the boy's file. I moved on again, but something told me to go back. The boy with the same birth date as my future spouse was also named Charles. There was no information about his family. The only thing listed was future guardians Vance and Vance P.W. My eyes rounded. I couldn't believe what I was seeing right now. Charles had never talked about the fact that he was an orphan, but the odds of him not knowing about it were very high. Could it have been a mere coincidence? Yes, but my gut told me it wasn't. I didn't know what I would do if I withheld such information from my loved one. It would be a lie, which I hate so much. But on the other hand, only parents should be told about such things. My principles won out, and I quickly called Charles, asking him to come to me right away. He didn't even ask any questions, said he was on his way, and hung up. I hastily prepared a light lunch to feed Charles, and then I frantically waited for him. The last few hours of waiting have been torture for me. Another bout of severe headaches knocked me out. There was a knock at the door, and later Charles came in, asking why the door was unlocked. Apparently, in my condition yesterday, I had forgotten to lock it after my mom came in. Charles, I'm sorry for leaving last night. I wasn't myself. I had so much on my mind, I said, but Charles held me close, kissing me gently on the top of my head. I'm ready to love you any way you want, impulsive, angry, funny, sad, kind, responsible, working. Charles whispered quietly, I will hold our love for both of us. When will it be hard for you? I guiltily raised my eyes to the man and asked him to sit down. He obeyed and sat down on the bed. You look worried. Did something happen again? My lover asked, looking around the room, which was in chaos. I slowly turned the laptop screen toward him and asked him to read the data, warning him not to take it personally right away. What did Charles ask after reading the personnel file of one Charles? Who is this? And why my parents' records? Charles, I could be wrong, but the date of birth and the family of the guardians, I blurted out, feeling the tension in the air in one breath. It could be someone else, but I couldn't keep a find like that from you. I sat next to him and wrapped my skinny arms around his broad back. He kissed the back of my palms, without taking his eyes off the monitor. Through several layers of clothing, I felt his body throbbing with heat, his skin covered in a thin layer of goosebumps. I wanted to take all the excitement and worry away, so he wouldn't feel what he was feeling at the moment. In an instant, he pulled out his phone, took a picture of his personal file, and jumped up abruptly from the bed. I'll come see you as soon as I meet my family. I love you. Charles gritted his teeth and walked out of the apartment, slamming the door. I panicked and subconsciously blamed myself for my lover's condition. There was no telling how this situation would turn out. Living for over 30 years, considering people as your parents, and then suddenly finding out that you were taken from an orphanage. Once again, one of the hardest days of my life has come. What else did fate have in store for me? My hands itched to call Charles and tell him it was a mistake, that it couldn't be. But he was already rushing to his family to find out the truth. The unknown is the most frightening of all. So I sat on pins and needles until 2 o'clock, waiting for news from Vance. The door opened and Charles walked in. Every lost person in the world. My cheeks burned with frost. Looking down, I noticed the wound on his arm was bleeding as well. What happened? I ran up to my lover and grabbed his wrist sharply. The blood was dripping and the wound looked bleak. Charles didn't say anything, just sat on the bed and breathed heavily. I fetched the first aid kit and began to treat the cut. It was pointless to ask Vance anything right now. He was as if in a trance, trying to understand himself, to answer the worrying questions in his head. I was close by and morally tried to give support to the one who always helped me in difficult moments. At one point, Charles turned to me and whispered softly, "Is it true?" I couldn't find the right words to answer, so I just hugged him tightly so that he could feel how much I cared about him. He nuzzled his nose into my neck, sobbing occasionally. At that age, it's hard to realize what your family has kept from you for years. Maybe if it wasn't for me, it would never have come out, and it made me feel guilty. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Charles looked at me in surprise, saying, "What does this have to do with you?" But I was the one who found the file and told you. "It's not your fault, Kathy." Would they ever tell, or would I ever find out for myself? Lies always come to light, concluded my future husband, and waved a sail in the lease on his cheek. He'd always been strong, never showing emotion. But now he is in front of me so defenseless, needing a hug and someone to listen and give advice. Are they your family? Anyway, I said, hoping that he would forgive his parents and move on with his life. It will be hard for me at first, but I have forgiven them. They raised me, brought me up to be a good person, and never gave me a reason to doubt their love. My lover's eyes lit up. Apparently, pleasant childhood memories of my mother and father surfaced in his mind. We sat like that, discussing his childhood until very late in the evening. Once again, one of the most difficult days of my life. Again, a storm of emotions, both negative and positive. We fell asleep with Charles right in our clothes, next to each other, holding each other tightly against each other. 2 weeks later, I was showing off in front of the mirror, trying on different dresses that Emily had prepared. She was a good designer, and as a thank you for helping me with it at the hospital, she offered a choice of dresses I could borrow from her. "Mom, it's dark blue. It fits perfectly." I turned 360 degrees so everyone could see what this gorgeous dress looked like. I'm wearing it. Mom looked at me warmly and nodded in approval. Once a lawyer, I knew helped Lisa divorce John and Sue Liam. Relations in our family improved. Mom started calling me for evening tea parties. We grew closer, and our hatred between us slowly faded. I've probably forgiven her for treating me that way. I grew up, realized my mistakes, and my mother realized hers. We became one big friendly family, and it was time to introduce my family to Charles, the closest person to me. We were preparing for his arrival. I was hesitant, and Lisa and Mom were setting the festive table. Dad was wiping down his sports awards from his youth to show them off to his future son-in-law. He looked at me guiltily, sometimes as if he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. "Dad, are you okay?" I asked him as I walked into the living room. He turned away abruptly and rubbed the goblet harder, ignoring me. I turned to him again. "Daddy, daughter," Daddy said quietly, coming toward me. "Forgive me for everything, and thank you for the money." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. I had hoped Mom would hide the fact that she had given me the money for the debt. "I'm in favor of Meshkov." I only nodded. Dad smiled and kissed me gently on the cheek. "Be happy," said the gray-haired man, and went on with his business. A slight anxiety was building up inside. Excitement made my stomach churn, and my palms sweated with nerves. Charles should have arrived by now, so everyone was ready for him. Lisa wasn't worried, since she had already seen him and called him occasionally. Dad had the easiest time, since he's the head of the family. The doorbell rang throughout the house, causing the whole family to line up at the entrance. Charles, dressed in a chic dark blue suit, a tee with a black overcoat thrown on top, walked in with 3 large bouquets of red roses and a small bag. My mom awed, and my sister's eyes sparkled. I just smiled gently and kissed the man on the cheek, helped him take off his coat, and gave everyone his snow-white smile. He handed a bouquet of flowers to each woman and shook my father's hand. I was beyond happy as my dad chatted sweetly with Charles, finding a common topic of discussion. Liam was running around the room playing with a new toy given to him by his future uncle. The day I found my family and was finally able to introduce them to the man I loved. Charles admired Mom's pie and complimented his sister's salads. Occasionally, he would cast me a look of tenderness and love and laugh at Liam falling. I wondered what kind of father my future husband would be. He would be the most caring, sensitive, responsible parent. And I don't regret one bit that I accepted Charles' proposal. I will remember this cozy, warm family dinner for the rest of my life. After saying goodbye to the family, Charles and I left the apartment and headed for the car. "You have a beautiful family," Vance said with a smile. "I'm glad this evening went well." Leaving a wet kiss on Charles' cheek, we moved forward. After discussing the event, Charles drove me home and went to his family to let them know that he would be bringing his fiancée to meet them next week. The subject of the orphanage was simplified and safely forgotten, which I was glad about. No longer did this mystery hold the heart of my father and mother, and Charles felt at ease. Once in my apartment, I finally lay down. My legs had been buzzing since the morning. I ran errands, grocery shopping for dinner, shopping for dresses, and helping Mom and Lisa with the cooking. Staring up at the ceiling, I wondered about the future. What would happen next? After meeting his parents, I would have to start preparing for the wedding. Knowing the status of my fiancé, a wedding can't be simple and inconspicuous. Charles said he wanted to show the world whose heart he could win, which made me very uncomfortable. Rather, I should be proud that my husband will be Charles Vance himself, a man whose name is on the lips of every second and in the thoughts of every third. But soon he will be my husband, the father of our children, and the head of our family. I want to have 3 children, a boy and 2 beautiful girls, so that they will take the best qualities from both of us. To be as beautiful as Charles and as kind as me. My smile stretched on its own as I thought of my future family. Before I knew it, over an hour had passed. I had showered and lay in a clean, fresh bed, happily closing my eyes in anticipation of tomorrow. The alarm clock, which had been ringing nonstop for over 5 minutes, made me get out of bed. Finding myself in the bathroom near the mirror, I was horrified. My face was covered in pigmented spots that I didn't know where they had come from. As a child, I had only been allergic to lilies. But knowing this, I never bought anything even scented with these flowers, so as not to be covered with strange spots. In a panic, I went to the kitchen to take my medicine, and on the table I found a huge bouquet of white lilies. A note lay nearby. The question that arose in my mind was who and how could have gotten into my apartment while I was asleep. Opening the note, the puzzle in my head came together. "I thank you for what you did for me and my wife. Sincerely, Noah Bracker." That asshole still has the keys to my apartment. There's no other explanation for those flowers. He didn't even know I was allergic, so he brought this particular bouquet. I smiled inwardly. I was glad that his wife was pleased with her husband's act, and that I had once again done a good deed gratuitously. But I still called Noah and asked him to get rid of the key to my apartment, and thanked him for such a wonderful surprise. After a drink of anti-allergen and pills, I put the gift away on the windowsill and started to get ready for work. The spots from my face were slowly going away, but not completely, from having flowers in my apartment. Going outside, I felt a nice breeze and breathed in a full lungful of fresh, cold air. Going to work, I greeted my colleagues and decided to spend half an hour with the kids. Each of them dreamed of a family, a mother's caress, and a father's guidance. They were still small, but because they were here in the orphanage, they understand many hardships of life from early childhood. They know what it is like to be left alone without support, without a mother who can protect, without a home where it is always cozy and warm. When I first got a job here, being very young, having just graduated from university, I cried almost every working day, suffering from pain for these little angels. I wanted to hug each one. I wanted to take them all home and raise them as my own children. But unfortunately, it was impossible. Here, either you are lucky and you get into a good family, or you grow up here until adulthood. And then you are released into free flight, and you are left all alone in this hard adult world. The sweet girl came up to me and looked at me with her light blue eyes. They were uncannily similar to Charles' eyes, which made me run my hand gently through her hair. She was barely 4, but her demeanor was much older. She only cried when she was really hurting physically, never got cranky, dressed herself, and tried to always help other children when needed. "Kathy, you look like my mom," Eve pronounced. Taking a seat next to me on the bench, I hesitated and wondered, because she came to us as a baby and can't remember her parents. "Do you remember her?" I asked. "No, but I feel that you look alike," the girl answered and smiled radiantly. I smiled back and thought about it. Going to my office, I was still thinking about the words of this clever little girl. Once I got to work, those thoughts left me, and I began to study the documents. Christina visited my office a couple of times during the day, informing me that there was an event for sponsors coming up, and I needed to contact them and arrange a meeting for the next few weeks. After calling everyone who sponsored our orphanage, the last person I called was Charles. "Beloved," I said as soon as my future spouse picked up the phone. "Hello," answered the man on the other end of the line. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I wanted to let you know that there is an event coming up, and you need to come over next Thursday to discuss the upcoming party," I cheerfully informed him. "Okay, I'll be there. Don't forget that we are going to my parents' house this Saturday." Charles' voice was as gentle as ever. I said I remembered everything. We said goodbye and I dropped the call. That Saturday, Lisa helped curl my hair while telling me how much Liam liked the girl from daycare. After her divorce from John, it was as if my sister had been reborn. Her eyes glistened with happiness. She felt alive. She found a job to her liking. She dressed much better than before. And she often came to my house to gossip and eat her special dry goods. I was happy to see her sister blossom. After all, if she's happy, and so am I. Lisa picked out a beautiful light-colored dress for me to match my beige-heeled shoes. I was almost ready and was waiting for Charles to pick me up. As soon as I thought of him, he called, "Kathy, I'm sorry. There was a force majeure at work. I won't be able to pick you up in time. Take a cab. I texted you the address. I'll meet you at the house," Vance assured me and hung up immediately. I thought something serious had happened, so I didn't get mad at my lover, telling my sister that I'd have to drive myself. She became agitated. I assured her that I would be fine and saw her off safely. Once I was home alone, I began to panic because meeting his parents had been planned for so long, and I was only doing it now. Thoughts of my mother-in-law not liking me filled my head. Especially after the incident with Charles' papers from the orphanage, her attitude toward me had worsened. That's what I thought. Putting on my coat and shawl, I was about to go out to catch a cab. But looking at the time, I realized that I would get there much earlier than Charles. So I decided to take the trolleybus to pass the time and think about my future meeting. I grabbed a bouquet of paper-wrapped flowers and left the apartment. Outside, it was slowly starting to warm up with the arrival of spring, but the snow was still lying, and the evening frost burned my cheeks. When I reached the bus stop, I saw a familiar face. Camille asked me in surprise. The woman turned around and reached out to me with a hug. I hugged the old woman gently, and we started talking. We also got on the trolleybus together and chatted the whole way, occasionally glancing out the window so we wouldn't miss our stop. "I'll get off here. I need to buy a cake for tea at the bakery. See you later, daughter," said Camille, and went to the conductor to pay the fare. Just a couple of minutes later, the voice of the trolleybus worker sounded disgruntled. She was aggressively trying to explain something to an old lady I knew. Not thinking long, I approached them and stood between Camille and the conductor. "Is there a problem?" I asked, looking at the woman in uniform. "The grandmother doesn't have her pension card with her." "Does she want a cheaper fare?" the conductor blurted out. "She gives me and the woman an angry look. Can't you tell she's a pensioner?" I said to defend Camille's point of view. The conductor's eyes widened, and she was ready to get into a verbal altercation with me. But Camille took my hand and shook her head, telling me to stop. "I pay full price," holding out a $10 bill. Worker, I turned around and walked the old woman to the exit. The woman nodded gratefully and didn't say anything. I sat down in my seat and sighed heavily. The conductor didn't look away from me for the rest of the ride. Anger became a residue in my mind over the situation, and I fidgeted all the way until it was my turn to get off. I saw a familiar neighborhood as soon as I stepped onto the street. Camille and Kevin lived nearby. I walked slowly to the house Charles had texted me and waited dutifully in the driveway. After 5 minutes of waiting, Charles's big SUV was visible at the beginning of the yard. He got out of the car and kissed me gently on the cheek, apologizing for not being able to pick me up. "You're insanely beautiful," Charles concluded and opened the door for me to go in first. The walls of the house looked familiar, but I didn't let it show. When we got to the 4th floor, I stared at the bell, which had a little bear painted on it, just like Camille's. I tensed up. A memory flashed through my mind, but I tried not to think about it. It couldn't be what I was remembering now. Charles pressed the bell, and slow footsteps sounded outside the door. I was startled to see 2 happy yet surprised familiar faces. "Kevin," I glanced questioningly at the man, and then shifted my gaze to the woman behind him. "Camille." I immediately remembered this sweet elderly couple telling me that they had adopted a son from the orphanage. On the trolleybus today, Camille was telling me that her future daughter-in-law was coming to meet her tonight. I didn't pay any attention to that at all, even when I saw the house. I thought that Charles's parents and my elderly acquaintances lived in the same house, but I didn't even realize it was them. "Kathy, did you decide to come in for tea?" the old lady asked uncomprehendingly. Mecca with eyes from me to Charles. "Son, where is the daughter-in-law?" Charles was the most stunned of all. He couldn't understand how we could know each other and why he didn't know about it. He was silent for a split second, opening his mouth in a coughing fit. At 6, he looked at his mom. "Mom, this is my fiancée, Kathy Vysotsky. Have you two met?" inquired my future fiancée, who was still surprised. "Charles, I'll explain everything to you now," I said, standing on the threshold. Camille hesitated and later led us into the house and seated us at the table. All this time we were in awkward silence. I'm waiting. It's a fascinating story of when and how my family managed to meet my future wife without my knowledge, Charles said, and fixed his gaze on his mother. She hesitated, but as soon as she wanted to speak, I gave her a warm look and began the story myself. I had helped this nice woman on the trolley a couple weeks ago. She invited me to tea. A week later, I met Kevin. I concluded, they are insanely kind and nice people. Charles, I'm glad I'm in such a good family. We were afraid you'd end up with some backwoods girl. How lucky we are to have Kathy. The older man exclaimed, but immediately calmed down at the serious look of his wife. It must be fate, Charles said, and gave us his snow-white smile. We all laughed together at the situation that had happened to us and started dinner. Charles' parents warmly told him about me, how nice we chatted over a couple of mugs of tea, and then began to talk about my future husband's childhood. We did not do without albums with old photos, which made Charles blush at times. We had a wonderful time. Charles' mom said in confidence that if another girl had come, she would not have been able to love her. We laughed with her and continued setting the table for tea. When it got dark outside, Charles and I decided to go home. Camille thanked me for the bouquet I had given her and kissed me on the cheek as we were leaving. "I am very happy to meet you already as my future mother-in-law and father-in-law," I said, hugging Kevin. "You are our daughter now." "We are very happy too," concluded Camille. We said our goodbyes and left the prince's family to their elders. It was the most unexpected meeting that could have happened to me. In my heart, I was insanely happy that Charles' parents had turned out to be such iridescent, sweet, and kind people. Now I had no doubt that Charles was my destiny. 6 months later, my palms were sweating. I folded nervously, and a lump formed in my throat from my morning awakening. There were people walking around the militia, but I was completely oblivious to them. Right now, my thoughts were filled with nothing but Charles. I pictured him in a black tuxedo, standing at the altar with his hand outstretched. Lisa was running toward me with a bouquet of flowers. Mom was trying to put a veil in my hair, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed with no sign of life. "Sisters, what's the matter with you?" my sister asked, looking into my sad face. "I'm scared," I replied. "There are so many people there that I think I will faint as soon as I step outside this room." "We're right here. Your father will walk you down the aisle. Your family is with you," Lisa concluded, stroking my hands with her warm palms. I smiled lightly and hid from my mom poking me with one of her stilettos. I was insanely grateful to my family for their support. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been able to survive the wedding jitters. Through all the hard times in our lives, we reunited and became one big, strong family again. As I put on my wedding dress and stood on my heels, I felt a burning sensation in my lower abdomen. My shaking hands, which could not hold the bouquet of the bride, gave away my excitement. Taking a deep breath, I pulled myself together and walked out into the main hallway where my father was already waiting for me. "You're beautiful," Dad said admiringly, putting up his hand for me to take hold of. "You're gorgeous too," I whispered and smiled. We walked to the main hall filled with hundreds of guests, of which mine was no more than 50. The red carpet was shot under my feet. The silhouette of my lover could be seen in the distance. I slowly stepped onto the carpet. A beautiful tune started playing, and I tried to relax. This was my day. The day I was the queen and Charles was the king. A day where our lives, souls, and destinies were woven once and for all. I caught admiring yet envious glances from girls and women. The men looked on with nobility and wonder. Perhaps the guests from Charles' side did not expect to see someone like me next to him, but it was too late to assume anything. With my head held high, I walked down the aisle with my father at my side. Charles's eyes traveled down my face from head to toe and stopped at my veiled face. His hand reached out to me, and I boldly placed my palm in his. I could feel his excitement through the touch. He was worried as much as I was. Once on the dais, from where I could see the entire auditorium, I gasped at the number of people who were all staring at us in anticipation. Charles leaned over to me and whispered, "You are amazing. I have chosen the best woman to be my wife in my life." I was embarrassed, and my cheeks blushed. Even though no one could see it, I could feel my face burning. The registrar appeared next to us. The man looked us over and nodded approvingly at Charles. The music grew quieter. Our parents sat in the front rows, and Lisa and Charles's close friend Joe stood near us. My knees were trembling under my dress. I was very nervous and afraid that I wouldn't be able to control myself and would faint right at the wedding ceremony. Charles' hands held me so tightly that I was sure he would hold me up. The registrar began his speech, and I noticed immediately that my mom and Camille were in tears, whispering among themselves. I smiled. It was nice to see my mother-in-law and mother-in-law interacting, and they really liked each other the first time they met. "Are you ready to take Kathy as your wife?" The registrar spoke and looked at Charles. "I do," Vance answered without a trace of doubt. "Are you ready to take Charles as your husband?" The registrar exclaimed again. A lump rose in my throat, and I thought for a moment that I could not speak nervously, but I answered nevertheless agreed. "Congratulations, you can exchange rings." Charles gently lifted my hand and placed the engraved ring on my ring finger. I felt a slight electric shock run through my body. I repeated the same motion with Charles' ring. By signing my name at that second, I lost my last name and became Vance Kathy. "Congratulations, you are now husband and wife. Can the groom kiss the bride?" The registrar exclaimed, and the gold spread throughout the room. My husband gently lifted the veil from my face and looked into my eyes. I was still in a state of shock and could not believe that all this was happening to me. "I love you," Charles said, and touched his moist lips to mine. The guests shouted bitter, and our moms were still crying with happiness. For a moment, The voices were silent, and it seemed to me that now my lover and I were all alone. My longtime dream had come true. I had found my own family with the man I loved. Breaking our kiss, I held my palm almost on my husband's cheek and said, "You are the best thing that happened to me in my whole life." The guests didn't stop applauding. The music got louder, and we went down to the families to receive congratulations. "Dear children, be happy. Long life to you and more babies," said Camille, and gave me a big hug. Then she kissed her son. Mom was still wiping tears from her cheeks and couldn't calm down. A happy lion was running around her and tugging at her dress. "Mom, I'm getting married." "Why are you crying with laughter?" I asked. "I am so happy for you that I can't contain my emotions." Mom pecked me on the cheek and hugged me as much as she could. I stroked her on the top of her head and also hugged my dad. Lisa at the same time danced merrily with Joe, not paying attention to the people around her. Apparently, loved ones. "Did you get a look at Demon's friend?" I asked my dad. He just laughed and looked at his eldest daughter fatherly. When we all found ourselves in the banquet hall, my mood doubled. Everyone was having fun, dancing, getting to know each other, and socializing. Charles and I could not part with each other for a second. Sitting at the newlyweds table, we held hands under the table and giggled at the guests who were ridiculously performing tasks from the contests. I occasionally watched a happy Lisa, who was getting to know people now and then and trying to find common ground with everyone. Mom was chatting sweetly with her saint, and Camille couldn't take her eyes off little Liam, who was running around the table. Everything I had dreamed of had come true and was there for me. Remembering the thoughts I wanted to share with Charles, I turned toward him. "Charles, there's something I want to tell you," I mumbled, distracting him from talking to me. "I'm listening to my favorites." Smiling through all 32 teeth, Charles replied. "I've been watching this girl at the orphanage for a long time," I began to say. "She looks just like you with her eyes. One day she came up to me and told me that she felt like I looked like her mom." Charles listened to me intently and did not interrupt. "Maybe it's a sign," I said cautiously. "Beware of your husband's violent reaction." At first Charles hesitated, even frowned, but then he smiled again and said, "With you, I am ready to take even 1,000 of these blue-eyed angels." I, not holding back my emotions, shrieked and threw myself into the arms of my beloved. Hear and repent with my nose in his neck, which smelled of pine and wood. There was no limit to the joy. We adopted Eva and would later have 2 more children. Once again, I was convinced how pure and kind a soul the man I loved so much had. As Charles and I looked at each other in love, we smiled and continued to watch. That day was the happiest day of my life. I fondly remember the moments of the family and Charles. Now in our family, there are already 3 happy children and 2 equally happy parents. And the little girl adapted quickly. As soon as we got her, and 2 years later we had twins in our family. The grandmothers are happy to spend time with their grandchildren, while Charles and I are busy with work. We go to parks in the evenings, take the kids to amusement rides on weekends, and try to go on vacation in the summer. Charles is doing everything he can to give me and our children a better future, and I am so grateful to him for that. Like I said, my husband is a wonderful father, occasionally overpromising, but that happens to all men. Fatherhood first. I was sitting at work, going through sponsorship agreements, and I came across him. Memories of earlier years popped into my head, where for weeks on end, strange situations happened that put me in a stupor at the time, although thanks to this difficult period in my life, and gained a lot of things. First of all, our love with Charles has been put to a tremendous test of strength. We didn't leave each other at crossroads, supported each other no matter what happened, and stayed true to our choices no matter what. All the historical ties after 10 years only grow stronger. After all, if it weren't for my sister's divorce, Lisa and I would not have been able to become as close as we are now. Her life has turned out very well. She married her husband 3 years after we were married, and her view of the world had changed, and her relationship with her parents had only gotten better after mutual help. And if it wasn't for her, we would still be living with my mother and father on each other. The main thing is that everyone realized his mistake and took into account his attitude to others. I have realized and understood a lot of things over the years, and now I feel that I have not made a mistake anywhere. Gratitude and support is what each of us deserves.
Subscribe and click the bell.
You're 5 years old. Daughter, congratulations, Mom exclaimed, entering the living room, where at the festive table gathered all the relatives, headed by the birthday girl. In her hands she held a huge cake, on which burned 5 candles. Well, come on, my girl, make the most cherished wish and try to overnight all the candles, pronounced Daddy, hugging the girl by the shoulders. I want. She thought for a second and looked around at everyone present. I want that we never parted, loudly said the girl and almost whispered added. And also this beautiful doll that we saw in the store. This one, asked the grandmother, and, opening the closet, took out the very doll that Evelyn had recently seen in the store and squeezed her mother's ears. What a big and beautiful toy it was, and how Evelyn would like it. But then her mother had been adamant, noting that they wouldn't spend that much money on such an expensive toy. Seeing the gift, little Evelyn was confused at first. She froze in place and looked at the doll and at her grandmother. I still can't believe what is happening. Honey, you're not happy? Grandpa asked. Why are you frozen? Birthday wishes should always come true. Evelyn smiled and clapped her hands in delight. She ran up to her grandmother and held out her arms in anticipation of the gift. When the cherished doll was in her arms, she looked at her grandparents and whispered, Grandma and Grandpa, you are the best in the world. Cindy and David, next time, consult with us. Before you give such expensive gifts, are you spoiling Evelyn? And admonished the pensioners in a disgruntled voice, the mother of the birthday girl. And I don't think we should indulge a girl's every whim. But her husband's parents disagreed. Maria, who else should we spoil? Grandpa stepped in. Who knows what will happen tomorrow and how long we have left? And what's wrong with a child to be happy? Especially she is our only granddaughter, added the mother-in-law. Evelyn was used to such conversations. She paid no attention to these words because all her thoughts were already in the yard with her favorite doll. The girls would burst with envy. No one has such a thing, reflected, smiling girl. Maria sighed heavily. She had nothing to say. She lived here on a bird's license. Her mother-in-law ran the apartment. Maria had met William at a friend's party 8 years ago. The guy fell in love with her, and as they say, at first sight. At that time, Maria had a young man whom she dreamed of marrying. But only this young man had completely different priorities. As he himself told her more than once, he hadn't piled on yet. What was the point of rushing into it? Maybe we're not right for each other, he explained to her while he looked around. Actually, I'm 21. Maria insisted. It's time for a family and kids. Why procrastinate? Especially since we've been together for 2 years. But he ignored all her arguments. Maria was angry, but she was patient and waited. Suddenly, she was invited to a birthday party in a tomb. There were a lot of people at the party, and William was among them. He immediately attracted attention. The girl stood out too much from the crowd, despite the fact that he was tall, handsome, polite, and expensively dressed, which spoke of his rather financial condition. But for all that, he was very shy. But even his modesty did not prevent him from asking Maria out on a date. And on the second date, he asked her to marry him. Maria was well aware that she had no feelings for him, but she really wanted to take revenge on her ex. Therefore, without thinking, she gave her consent. And in a month and a half, the girl stood in the registry office, in white, 5, and mind-blowing wedding dress. Everything as it should be. Then a motorcade of several cars drove them around the city, and all the girlfriends were bursting with envy. Yes, Maria, you're lucky to get a guy with money and an apartment. Yeah. Well, What are you gonna do with your parents? They're not forever. But in the center of the city, you'll live like Christ at your side, they told each other. After the ceremony, the newly wedded couple flew to the sea and a whole week enjoyed the sound of the surf and basked under the hot sun on the hot white sand. Maria was over the moon with happiness, but the euphoria quickly passed and the reality remained. Back home, they plunged headlong into everyday cares. William was at work all day long. Maria was finishing her degree in knitwear. The spouses saw each other only at breakfast and dinner when William came home. But Maria was satisfied with this state of affairs. Finishing her studies, she met every day with her girlfriends. Did they gossip in cafes or sing karaoke? She met her ex a couple times. He held the hand of his new party and pretended not to even know Maria. His indifference was a terrible blow to the girl's ego. And she vowed to herself, "In spite of you, I'll be the happiest woman in the world." The young couple lived in the center of the city in a two-bedroom with William's parents. The apartment, of course, was not huge, but there was plenty of space. The big room was given to the young, and in the smaller one, the owners themselves organized. My mother-in-law continued to run the household, and Maria was very happy about it. "You have your whole life ahead of you to prepare and clean," Maria's mother-in-law kept saying. "Children will go quickly. All you learn to cook and wash and iron. And while there is time, enjoy life." Maria liked this life very much. After graduating from technical school with a specialty, she decided not to go anywhere and went to work as a clerk in the nearest store to the house. Paid, of course, a little, but it was enough for little girls. Weekends she went with her friends to the disco, periodically acquired. William did not say a word to her. He himself was happy to see his young wife happy and satisfied. And his friends couldn't stop admiring him. You could only dream of such a thing. They talked about William. He doesn't limit anything, doesn't reproach anything, doesn't forbid anything, doesn't yell Maria. Should you carry him in your arms? Oh no, he should thank all the gods that I met on his way. Laughed the young woman in response. Few people would agree to live with a mother-in-law and mother-in-law. "Come on, your mother-in-law is a saint," exclaimed back her friends. "On such a one only pray." "Well, then pray," parried Maria. "I'd rather live separately, but it's probably more convenient for my William." With sadness in her voice, cried the woman. A year after the marriage, Maria realized she was pregnant. William was incredibly happy. He literally carried his wife in his arms. Cindy and David were anxiously waiting for their granddaughter to be born. They worried about their daughter-in-law, did not allow her to do anything, so that she would not suddenly get tired. They controlled her diet, her sleep. Mother-in-law freed her from all the household chores, although in principle Maria and before did not help much. And she was fine with it. But still, every chance she got, she reminded me, "The apartment is not mine. What right do I have to manage and change anything?" When Evelyn was born, and Maria didn't feel very excited when you were pregnant, you thought you were ready for motherhood. And when the baby girl came into the world, she was a very annoying young mother. I didn't realize she would need so much of my attention. She took up all of my free time, and she was soul-crushing. Maria friend. Everyone said that the first year, the baby only sleeps. But that's not really the case. Not only does she wake up with the roosters and nice outside during the day, but at night she wants to play. Can you believe it? And I'm exhausted. I want to sleep too. And the figure of a girl. Look at what I look like. Instead of breasts, there's some kind of sacs. Her stomach hangs. Maria, we don't understand. We don't understand, her friends objected. Your mother-in-law is dusting you off. All you have to do is raise your daughter, and that's all you do. That's easy for you to say, William. He doesn't help me at all. A girl comes home from work and goes to bed. She plays with her daughter for maybe 15 minutes, and that's it. That's interesting. So you want your husband to work and take care of your daughter. And what will you do? Sleep. I don't know, but my daughter's not just mine, she's ours. That means that both of us have to take care of her. Time flew by. Evelyn grew up. She learned to play on her own and sleep longer. Maria went back to work, and she was glad she did. Every day in the mornings, she took the girl to daycare and flew to work. In the evenings, she did not hurry home. She liked to sit and gossip with her friends, drink tea, discuss the latest news. She didn't worry about the girl because she was sure that her father or grandparents would come for her. Evelyn did not reach for her mother and did not miss her unnecessarily. She loved her father madly. And about the grandparents, there is nothing to say. The child simply idolized them, and those in return did not dote on his granddaughter. William also adored the girl, but because of work could not give her much time. But when in those rare free moments they went out for a walk or to have fun. Little Evelyn remembered it all for a long time and remembered at any opportunity. And recently he promised to give her a small kitten. Evelyn clapped her hands in delight, but she immediately blew it off. Mom probably won't let him, she said quietly, looking into her father's eyes. Well, let's not tell her anything yet, and we'll see. Maybe I can talk her into it, Dad promised. The day before her birthday, Evelyn and her parents went shopping for a new dress. And that's when she noticed the beautiful doll that stood on the highest shelf. While her mother tried on her cover and twirled the girl in all directions to assess how well the new outfit fit, the girl kept her eyes on the toy. If you want, you can choose another dress. Which you like the most? Smiling, offered Maria. Can I not have a dress? I'll have a doll. Of course not. Immediately the mother replied with a refusal. Look how much it costs. No toy can cost that much money. It's not gold after all. But the grandparents decided to fulfill the dream of their only granddaughter. And the girl was so happy. She had already decided to go to the street to show her friends a new doll. As suddenly froze on the threshold and listened, her attention was attracted by a quiet squeak that came from the bedroom. Putting the doll on the floor, she decided to check what the sound was. Looking into the room, the girl saw a huge box with a bow in the center. Quickly opening it, she shrieked in surprise. Inside the dolls was a tiny gray kitten. Evelyn immediately ran out of the room and threw herself around her father's neck. Are you the best daddy in the world? She whispered in his ear, simultaneously wiping away tears of joy with her small palms. Then she rushed back and pulled her pet out of the box. The girl gently cuddled him to her and closed her eyes. This is the best birthday ever, she whispered. And when Evelyn left for the yard, Maria let her emotions run wild. You could have consulted me. I understand that my opinion doesn't matter to you. One gave an expensive doll, the other brought this furry monster. The woman was offended that her gifted dress was the one the girl liked the least. She almost cried with resentment. I want to remind you that I'm raising her alone. I'm trying to raise her to be a human being. All you can do is pamper her and let all my labor go to waste. And then Cindy, Maria, came to her son's defense. Her tone was steady and calm. Can't you rejoice with us with your daughter? Instead, you're only on her birthday. What's so terrible about a child's wishes being fulfilled? Your dress is also incredibly beautiful, but you have to realize that she's only 5 years old. And at that age, she likes toys more than outfits. That's not the point. The daughter-in-law was falling apart more and more. It's just that you all try at every opportunity to point out to me that I'm a bad mother, a worthless wife and mistress. But here you are wrong. Maria calmed her mother-in-law. Just by virtue of youth and inexperience, you do not yet understand many things. But all this will come with the years. So you're saying I'm not capable of anything. Maria, stop yelling at Mom. William suddenly spoke up. We're living in their apartment with everything. They're the ones helping Evelyn and me. And you have to admit, without my parents, it would be a little difficult. Evelyn spends most of her time with them. You have no right to raise your voice to your mom. Have you ever wondered why I still live here? Maria turned to her husband. Because my husband is so comfortable with Mommy. He hasn't even tried to get his own place. Every day I hear people saying we have to wait. We have to be patient. It'll be here soon. Yeah, I've been living on your promises for years. How much longer do I have to wait? William was silent. Cindy and David watched their son with a measure of sympathy, and after a little silence, the man said, "It's a shame. I wanted to give you an anniversary present, a surprise, so to speak. But I guess I'll have to give up that idea. I've got the money for the apartment. I've saved up. This weekend we can drive around and see what's available." Maria was speechless with surprise, and immediately there was no trace of resentment. She instantly cheered up, ran up to her husband, and threw herself on his neck. His parents left the room, leaving the couple alone. They were really happy for their son, that at last he would be able to buy his own place. But it was still unsettling. They understood perfectly well that Maria is not ready for an independent life, but maybe she will learn everything faster. "My father-in-law said, 'We can only believe it,'" nodded his wife. William and Maria soon bought a one-bedroom in a residential area. But the young wife was happy about that too. During the move, she only kept talking about how the girlfriends would get a place to live. But she was not happy for long. Independent life without her husband's parents was not so simple. Now Maria in the morning not only hurried with her daughter to kindergarten, but in the evenings took her away from there, because William did not have time to do it. And when she came home, she didn't go to her room to rest, but hurried to the kitchen to prepare dinner for the weekend in non-stop mode, when she had to do an incredible number of things in just 2 days. She didn't even want to remember. The woman had forgotten the last time she had gone out with her friends. Nerds were on the limit, and they scandalized her and her husband constantly, and for any reason. Maria often took it out on little Evelyn. And as a result, the girl became silent and withdrawn. Once at work, Maria's colleagues decided to organize a corporate party. Maria warned William in advance that today he had to pick up Evelyn from daycare. William agreed and left for work. In the evening, Maria's phone was ready to explode with calls. William and her mother-in-law tried to call her alternately, but Maria persistently did not pick up the phone. She realized that now she would have to go to kindergarten to pick up her daughter and disrupt her corporate event. But when an unfamiliar number popped up on her cell phone, the woman answered, "Maria, are you picking up Evelyn? The garden has been closed for half an hour already." The kindergarten teacher expressed her dissatisfaction. "I'm on my way," muttered Maria. In response, and glancing at her watch, hailed a cab. All the way she tried to call her spouse, but his phone was disconnected. After apologizing to the disgruntled kindergarten teacher and gathering her daughter quickly, she went outside. On her way home, she pushed Evelyn up every now and then, dragging her by the arm. The girl could barely keep up with her irritated mother. She heard her mother cursing at her father, calling him selfish, irresponsible, a worthless husband, and a disgusting father. And as they approached the driveway, suddenly the phone rang again. Looking at the screen, she saw that it was her mother-in-law. "What do you all want from me?" she whispered out of breath, angry at having disrupted the party. "Yes," barked the woman into the phone. "Maria's unhappy. Or an old woman. William's been hospitalized. I don't understand you at all. Can you explain what happened?" Maria asked, not hiding the irritation in her voice. William was in a car accident. She tried to explain clearly, swallowing her tears. "He's in surgery now. I've been calling you all evening, but I couldn't get through." Maria left Evelyn with a neighbor and rushed to the hospital. The doctor met her there and informed her that William had died without regaining consciousness on the operating table. Injuries incompatible with life. They did everything they could. It took Maria a while to realize what the doctor had said. The woman looked at her husband's parents, sitting in an embrace on the couch. Cindy was roaring in her voice, and David, pale as a sheet, was clasping his grief-stricken wife. The whole week that followed was a blur. Black robes, lots of sad people, most of them strangers, and suddenly no one. Empty in the apartment, empty in Evelyn's soul, the only reminder of the past. The girl was more withdrawn than ever. She like a shadow wandered around the apartment, moving silently, and in her little heart settled universal sadness. But time does not stand still. Gradually, Maria came to terms with the loss. Unlike her daughter, who missed her daddy madly until now, the girl spent all her time playing with the cat that her father had once given her. The grandparents supported the granddaughter as best they could and often took her to their home together with her father. Only their care and love helped the little girl to come back to life. And when Evelyn went to school, Maria brought her suitor to the house. "Let's get acquainted." She introduced her daughter to him. "This is my daughter Evelyn. And this is Uncle Mark. He will now live with us, which means that he is now your daddy." The girls were not thrilled with their mother's new acquaintance. He was short, unshaven. He was the exact opposite of William. The man reluctantly extended his hand to the girl, but the girl responded by hiding her palm behind her back and whispering, "My daddy died." And soon Uncle Mark moved his things out. The relationship with Evelyn was not getting better. The girl did not want a strange man to live with them. And on the shelves of the father lay his things, but no one was interested in the opinion of the little girl. The mother was completely dissolved in the new relationship. She tried her best to please the gaggle, forgetting all about her daughter. Cindy and David were worried about their granddaughter. They saw how Evelyn treated her mother's roommate. They often took the girl to their house. Well, it was not as often as they would have liked. And soon Maria announced that she was pregnant and that she and Mark had decided to get married. And when Mark began to live in their apartment on the legal grounds of the spouse, then for Evelyn began an unbearable life. Stepfather constantly scolded the girl, punished for every little thing. And the mother turned a blind eye to everything, supporting the methods of education of the new husband. After a while, the family became bigger by one little man, who was named Vanessa. And all the attention of Maria and Mark was riveted to her. All their free time they tried to spend together with the little girl. And when the mother needed to do something around the house, Evelyn played the role of a nanny. At such moments, Evelyn looked at the baby's tiny hands and fingers with curiosity. She talked to her and gently stroked her head, which was covered with a delicate tuft of hair instead of hair. Evelyn had no jealousy or dislike for her little sister. She believed that when Vanessa grew older, they would surely be friends. As time went on, the stepfather and stepdaughter relationship never got better. Evelyn's presence. Mako was annoyed, and he didn't even hide it. And one day, Evelyn overheard her mother and stepfather talking. "Are you out of your mind?" Maria was indignant. "Where can I put her? I propose to sell this apartment because one room for everyone is not enough. We'll buy a 2 or 3. Then the problem with your daughter will solve itself," Mark reasoned. "But that's impossible. I must get the consent of my father-in-law and mother-in-law," replied the woman. "Here are their shares after her husband's death." "Well, then we must explain to them that we're all cramped in here," Mark insisted. When they saw Colia, they were immediately able to. And a couple of days later, when Maria brought Evelyn to her grandparents to visit, she decided to talk to them about it. After listening carefully to her daughter-in-law, her mother-in-law asked, "Maria, do you know for sure that you will find a place for Evelyn in the new apartment?" "What do you mean by that?" The woman was surprised. "I'm suggesting another option." My father-in-law entered the conversation. "You're going to take out a mortgage anyway, right? So let us buy out your share, and that way everybody's happy. You get the down payment, and we get the memory of our son." Maria didn't like that offer. She planned to get the whole apartment, but on the faces of the elderly couple realized that they would not agree to more. So she nodded in agreement. Cindy and David sold their favorite dacha, where they spent a lot of time in the summer car and garage. The proceeds, it was enough to buy out Maria's share and Evelyn's share. Maria was surprised, counting the money they received. "Evelyn, this apartment will be a gift from us when the girl grows up," Cindy clarified. Mark was the most unhappy about the whole situation. "Then let your daughter stay here." The man did not stop resenting. "Otherwise, I'll take her to the army and dress her, and then she'll burst into flames and go to her apartment. And she won't even say a kind word to me. I'll be paying this mortgage for the rest of my life. And these juvenile runaways are already in and out of the apartment. Mark, I couldn't change anything. I tried to justify myself. Don't be mad. We'll make money. We'll pay it off quickly. What are you going to earn? Igor started a husband in his store with our income, as if not to starve. But I want to remind you that the idea of a spacious apartment was yours. Maria smiled. Who knew that this house was not yours? Admitted her husband. If I had known, I wouldn't have been here. Mark, what are you talking about? Maria was frightened. I don't believe that you're with me only because of the apartment. No, don't worry about it. I didn't mean it like that. The man came to his senses and took his little daughter in his arms and ran up to him. He adored Vanessa. It's just that this injustice makes me angry. So one of your daughters has an apartment and the other one's broke. But Vanessa has a father. And Evelyn only got an apartment from her father, Maria parried. They ended up buying. They are two-room. One room was allocated to the parents, and the second served as a bedroom for the girls. The sisters grew up amicably. The older sister gladly took care of the younger one, and the younger one paid the older one with her love, which Evelyn lacked in her new family. Evelyn still paid no attention to her except when she needed to be scolded or punished for something. We had always been cool to Evelyn, and with the birth of her daughter, she had grown cold to her. And one day, when Evelyn was in 6th grade, the girl came home earlier than usual. Mom was at work at the time and Vanessa was at daycare. The stepfather had been staying at home for a few days. He had recently been fired from his old job and was on the lookout for a new one. Upon entering the apartment, Evelyn was struck by the woman's shoes at the door. Her mom had never seen those before. Seeing the loss, Mark became furious. "Why are you here so early?" he shouted. "Lessons are not over yet. Our teacher got sick and canceled." Evelyn excused herself for the last class, staring at the unfamiliar shoes. "And we have someone visiting." "No, they're the neighbor's shoes. She was just leaving," the stepfather replied, noticing the direction of his stepdaughter's gaze in the room. Evelyn obediently went to her room. After seeing her off, Mark went to her room. "You've got a lot of homework." Evelyn looked at her stepfather. It was the first time the man asked her about her studies for all the years of living together. "No," the girl answered. "Evelyn, you see," the man was hesitating, obviously choosing his words. "You probably do not tell your mother that the neighbor came. Otherwise, she'll just make up stuff." "What is there to make up?" The girl didn't understand. "Nothing. It's very simple. Don't tell everything." Evelyn did as Mark asked her, but it did not escape her attention that the relationship between stepfather and mother had become somewhat strained. They were often scandalized, accusing each other of every mortal sin. It was not uncommon for the girls to get into trouble if they got in the way. Evelyn stayed with her grandparents more and more often because that's where she was loved. And once, when the house was quiet after another scandal, Evelyn took a suitcase and put her things in it, told her mother, "Sile, I have no more patience for your husband. I'm tired of your constant bickering. Now I will live where I am loved and expected." Maria calmly accepted this fact, and deep down she felt relieved. At first she didn't even ask her mother-in-law how her eldest daughter was feeling. Evelyn didn't waste any time. She tightened her studies, corrected all the bad marks, which recently became more and more. Teachers also noticed positive changes in the girl. She began to smile more often. She cheered up, and Evelyn did not even remember her mother. The only person she missed was her little sister. By graduation, Evelyn had already decided what she wanted to be in the future, and her choice was a psychologist. "Yes, I've made up my mind," she told her grandparents, "especially since our university has a department of psychology, and I've found out. Well, it's not a bad choice," supported granddaughter David. "Psychology is a serious science," agreed Cindy. "But Maria, hearing about her daughter's decision, frankly laughed. Is it a profession to work? A vest for strangers? She expressed her opinion. Don't you have enough problems of your own? You're digging into other people's problems. Why are you doing this? Evelyn's mother's reaction didn't surprise her. She probably, in her heart of hearts, was prepared for the fact that her parents would not support her. After all, her mother ridiculed all her ideas from childhood and called them delusional. Well, at least I can understand you, explained the daughter. Why do you so much time looking into the mouth of a man who does not put you in anything? How can you love him more than your own children? How can you have the conscience to say such things? The woman was outraged. Mark raised you, replaced your daddy. Vanessa adores him. Everybody fights. That's how life works. Mom, do you really mean that? Evelyn was surprised. He's a bum who sits on his neck all the time. He can love, but not me. And he could never replace my daddy. Your husband is a total Alfonso, a womanizer and an egomaniac. He's no match for daddy. It's your choice, and you have to live with it. And I have no right to judge you. But don't glorify him in my eyes. I'm not blind. Listening to the eldest daughter, Maria, from indignation, could not utter a word. And when she was silent, he only gritted his teeth. How ungrateful you are. But Evelyn only smiled at that. She remembered that she had never regretted it since she had left her mother's house. But why should we? The girl was unfazed. I am immensely grateful to my daddy, from whom I got wonderful genes. I am immensely grateful to my grandparents, who loved me and put their souls into me, taught me forgiveness, and most importantly, to appreciate what you have. I am even grateful to you for giving me life many years ago, and most importantly, for not talking me out of leaving you back in the day. I am grateful to Vanessa, who loves me and sees me as a human being, unlike you and your husband. But I have nothing to be grateful to a stranger who came to our house on the spot and did nothing to earn my trust and favor. Maria remained silent, and only with a frown at her daughter, she left the apartment. Evelyn entered the psychology program. She was very happy with her choice and graduated from the institute with a red diploma. Next, Evelyn, several other graduates, as the best students, were sent for internship in one of the centers of psychological help to people who found themselves in a difficult life situation. The girl was incredibly grateful to fate that she got such a chance. Cindy and David were proud of their granddaughter, and at the graduation decided to give her their gift. Evelyn, her grandmother, addressed her. You know that your grandfather and I love you madly and want only one thing, for you to be happy. We are proud of you and hope that you will continue to develop in the same direction you have grown and are ready for independent life. So we decided. Grandma paused to brush away the tears that were running. We decided to sign over your father's apartment to you. Grandpa came to the rescue. Evelyn couldn't believe everything that was happening as she stood in the very apartment where she had once been very happy. I thought it had been sold, she admitted. Mom had told me that they had put the money from its sale as a down payment on the apartment they were living in now. Yes, we bought her share then, David admitted. So that's why you're left without a car and garage. Evelyn guessed, and we don't regret it. Smiled Cindy. You're our joy. You're all we have left, William. So please accept our gift as a token of our undying love for you. Thank you. Through tears, Evelyn thanked them. I love you too. You are my most dear people in this world. Soon, Evelyn moved into a new apartment. It was harder to visit her grandparents every day, but she called them every day to check on their health. Having finished her internship at the Psychological Help Center, Evelyn was offered to stay there to work. The salary, of course, is not very big, but you will get an incredible experience, said the head of the center, holding out the employment contract for her to sign. Evelyn, not thinking long, agreed. During the year, she got used to the team. But most of all, she liked to help people. After all, it was thanks to her efforts that people became happier. And from this realization, she got inexplicable pleasure. Vanessa often visited her older sister. From her, Evelyn learned news from home, although it was hard to call it news. In her mother's family, everything was the same. Mark was still out of work, but he claimed to be on the lookout for a decent job. I've even seen him with other women a couple of times, Vanessa admitted. I think he's cheating on Mom. Vanessa, don't you worry about that. Her sister advised her. The parents will figure it out. It's not a big deal to pry into a couple's relationship. Believe me, it's a thankless task. Vanessa nodded in agreement. Do you mind if I crash at your place tonight? The school canceled classes for tomorrow, the little sister explained. We're going to the exhibition. No problem then, Evelyn said happily. Such evenings the sisters stayed up late. They had something tasty for dinner and talked for a long time, drinking tea with candy. Vanessa shared her secrets with her sister and asked her opinion. She asked for advice, shared her plans for life. Evelyn listened to her with pleasure. She liked that despite their different fathers and age difference, they were very close. On the day of her 25th birthday, Evelyn did not organize a lavish party, but decided to celebrate modestly with her family. All were invited, except for her stepmother. But her mother, citing indisposition, also did not come, congratulating her daughter on the phone. Vasilieva sat all evening, was not herself, did not answer questions, all the time translating the topic of conversation. We'll marry you off to a reliable man, then you can die with peace of mind, David said. Grandpa, what are you talking about? His granddaughter stopped him. You have great-grandchildren to nurse. God willing. God willing. Cindy whispered softly. But fate had its own plans for her. 6 months later, her grandfather died of a heart attack, and her grandmother outlived her husband by only 1 year. But before she died, she made a will for Evelyn. To Evelyn's surprise, Maria showed up at her mother-in-law's funeral. In all these years, they had not spoken to each other. She hadn't been to her grandfather's funeral either. And this is a surprise. I'm glad you're here, thanked her eldest daughter. How could I leave you at a time like this? Replied the mother. And here everything is the same, she said, looking around. The wallpaper has just been changed, and the furniture is still the same. Mom, what are you talking about? You couldn't believe your ears, could you, Evelyn? The same thing. Mother explained with a shrug. It's been so many years since your father and I left this apartment, and it feels like yesterday. You could change the furniture. I don't think this is the time to discuss it, Evelyn said. And I want to remind you that my grandparents took care of me, fed and clothed me. And you cut me out of your life. As soon as the front door slammed behind me, oh, don't push it, Maria waved me off. I was always thinking about you, but I realized that you'd be better off here. A month later, her mother came to Evelyn's house to have tea and cake, which surprised the eldest daughter incredibly. What a surprise. Evelyn couldn't help pouring the tea. Did something happen? Maria asked her nonchalantly. I'm your mother, after all. Can't I just visit my own daughter? No, of course you can. It's just strange why the thought never occurred to you in the past few years. She admitted it, but it still feels good. Maria silently looked around, as if in between asked, What will you do with the apartment? Nothing, noble. I'll move here. You're alone. Why do you need a 2-room apartment? Well, first of all, it's not just an apartment for me, Evelyn explained. This is my home. It's where I grew up, where I was happy. And 2, it's in the center of town. It's a 5-minute walk to work. And after a little silence, her mother asked again, And 1 room, it will be empty. No, Evelyn assured her. I'll rent it out. The mother's face showed that she was not satisfied with her eldest daughter's plans. Soon, Evelyn renovated the 1-bedroom apartment as she had planned and moved in, renting out the studio. At this point, Vanessa was already in her first year of college. Maria continued to meet regularly with her eldest daughter. Her plan was to get Evelyn to sign the apartment over to Vanessa. Why would I give my apartment to Vanessa? I didn't see what Evelyn had to do with it. But you two are friends. She's your little sister, you know, she's your younger sister. Maria's older daughter. That's selfish of you, I inherited the apartment from my father. Vanessa has her own father, so let him worry about his daughter's future. Evelyn, well, you know very well that Mark can't offer her anything. Her mother persuaded her. But seeing that Evelyn was adamant, she went for broke. And to be fair, the apartment is also mine, so I'm also an heiress and have a share in it. I did, agreed the daughter, until she sold it to her grandparents, and their will was, do you like it or not? And I will not violate it. Yes, mother, you certainly are. Mark was indignant. You can't even reason with your own daughter. What can I do? It's all according to the law, answered Maria. Both apartments she inherited. I'm powerless. And what does the law have to do with it? When it's about family, the man insisted. Where does she need so many apartments? Is she going to salt them or what? Why couldn't she live in a one-room apartment? She could have given her sister a two-bedroom. Especially since Vanessa is getting married. Kids will be here soon. Where can we fit everything in here? I, for one, don't want to share an apartment with a strange man. Well, your suggestions. I've talked to Evelyn many times, but she just keeps saying what's mine, and that's it. So we'll just have to play it cool if she won't take the easy way out. Mark suggested it. She's renting out a one-bedroom, and she doesn't care who she rents it to. So she should rent it to Vanessa. What difference does that make? Maria didn't understand. Evelyn wouldn't charge her own sister. Her conscience won't allow it, the mayor explained. And if her conscience allows it, then in a couple of months we'll say there's no money. Yum family so-and-so. Evelyn will not throw Vanessa out on the street. Maria thought for a moment. Her husband was right about some things, but the whole situation was a mess. It didn't seem right. The wife hesitated. Of course it was. And when one of the sisters is bursting with wealth and the other is starving, is that right? When Vanessa came home from school, her father decided to talk to her. Daughter, Mom and I consulted and came to the conclusion that it is wrong when one sister has everything and the other has nothing. I'm referring to Evelyn's apartments now, Mark explained. She'd inherited them from her father. The girl reminded him, I don't have a claim on her. Maybe you don't, but I do. The father said irritably. Greed and selfishness must be cut off at the root. What do you want? I don't understand you, Vanessa asked, and the father laid out his cunning plan to his daughter. Vanessa listened carefully and turned to her mother. You agree with him? Maria is not sure. She shrugged her shoulders and then answered, but you have to live somewhere. Your James is a country boy. You can't live in a dormitory, and renting is expensive. You can't afford it. It's better than all of us living here. So you've decided to take one of Evelyn's apartments. I'll find the words. I'll put Maria's daughter in her place. We're talking about your sister. Exactly. And from the outside, it looks like she's our blood enemy, Vanessa retorted. Mom, Evelyn, your own daughter, is just like me. She's been through enough in her life. She's basically an orphan with her mother alive. I wouldn't wish that on her. And now you want to take away the last thing she has. What are you talking about? Maria was outraged. Yes, my father and I care about your future. And I think my father's plan is a good one. Didn't your father try to start doing something and earn his daughter a place to live? Has that idea ever occurred to you? I see Dad talks a lot, but he doesn't do anything. I didn't expect you to be so mean, said Vanessa and ran out of the house. She slowly took the street and pondered on what had happened. Vanessa loved her older sister, and sometimes she didn't understand why her mother was so cold to her. What could be so wrong with the child to kick her out to live with her grandparents? Didn't her mother miss her? Didn't understand that her behavior only increased the gap between them? Many questions arose in Vanessa's mind. She walked without making out the road, and when she raised her head and looked around, she realized that she was standing in front of the center where Evelyn Vasilieva worked. Had been here a couple of times, but then she hadn't paid any attention at all to the visitors to this establishment. Today, as she was walking up to her sister's office, she was met by several women. They were all different in age and status, and in appearance, but there was one thing they had in common. In each one's eyes sat a deep sadness, to say the least. A detachment. They'd probably lacked love too, Vanessa suggested. Sis heard. Suddenly, she heard Evelyn's voice behind her. "What are you doing here?" Inviting her guest's office, Evelyn poured tea and sat down next to her sister. "Are you sad?" she remarked. "Did something happen with James? Did you have a fight or something with Mom?" "No, they're fine," Vanessa reassured her sister. A more expectant look came over her, but the girl remained silent, hesitant to speak. There was a feeling that she regretted her coming. Evelyn did not insist on speaking. She silently drank tea and occasionally glanced at her sister. "Olga, do you love your mother?" Suddenly Vanessa asked. "What a question, of course," without thinking, answered the older sister. "And why did you ask about it?" "Well, because I always wondered why she treats us differently," the girl confessed. "At one time I even thought that you were not her own. She's always neglected you." "Why? I don't know why you're bringing this up all of a sudden." Evelyn smiled. "But I just thought if I had 2 children I would love one less too." But Vanessa smiled at Evelyn and hugged the girl. "It's wedding jitters. All mothers love their children equally, and you will love both. So why are we treated so differently?" Vanessa wouldn't give up. "I've often wondered about that too," Evelyn admitted. "But I think my mother resents my father for leaving her alone with a baby in her arms." She shared her assumption. "Well, that's silly. First of all, how can you take offense at a dead person? And secondly, what did the child have to do with it?" The girls drank their tea in silence, each thinking about something else. Finally, Evelyn stood up, cleared the table, and sat down next to her sister, took her hand and said, "It will be different for you. Do you and Serioza love each other? And children will be born. You will love them. And Mom." Evelyn was silent for a few seconds and added, "Mama is just an unhappy woman. She should be understood and pitied. After her first marriage, she was left a young widow, and her second husband turned out to be a loser and an Alfonso." "Yes, I understand everything," Vanessa replied. "I love my dad, but he really, all his life, lives at Mom's expense. One thing I don't understand is why she put up with all this for so many years. Does she really love him? She's probably driven by fear. She's afraid of being alone," said Evelyn. "But she won't be alone, and we're being childish," said Vanessa. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and a middle-aged woman came in. "Evelyn, we need you." She disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared. "I have to go." Evelyn got up from her chair and walked over to her sister. "It was good to see you without filling your bright head with bad thoughts. You're going to be fine, and I'll always be here for you. And if you need anything, I'll be there for you." "I never thought that my daughter was so selfish." Maria expressed her displeasure when Evelyn once again refused to give one of the apartments to her younger sister. "But I guess I should have raised her better." Evelyn smirked. "And the grandparents, I see, didn't do it at all," surprised the mother. "They did, but they did it as they saw fit. And you have no right to judge them. They replaced my family, not you." Maria didn't like that kind of talk. She couldn't take criticism of herself, especially about her daughter. It probably hurt her that Evelyn was telling the truth, and Maria felt deep down guilty about her older daughter. Vanessa was preparing for the wedding. The date had already been set, invitations sent out and rings bought. But when Evelyn was offered the position of manager of the new branch of the Center for People in Difficult Situations, she hesitated. "But I'd have to move to another city. I can't leave everything now, and there's a lot to leave." The director wondered, "What or who's stopping you?" "It's not that." Evelyn was embarrassed. "It's just that my little sister is getting married soon." "That's fine. You'll take a walk and go." She offered to fix up the branch. "Come back here in a couple years and take my place." Evelyn had no more arguments to refuse. The colleague who rented her apartment had also moved to another city. So Evelyn, knowing that the newlyweds had nowhere to live, offered them a one-room apartment. For the time being, until they solved the issue of their own housing. Vasilieva was overly grateful to her sister, and the stepfather was dissatisfied. And he didn't hide it. You could have offered a two-bedroom, he grumbled. After leaving, Vanessa often called Evelyn and shared the latest news. One day, she blurted out that her mother was on sick leave. Something had Evelyn seriously worried. There was silence on the phone for a while. And then Vanessa laughed and said, "Don't worry, it's nothing." And after the conversation, Evelyn couldn't find room for worry. She felt that Vanessa was not telling her the whole story. Then Evelyn decided to call her mom. Maria didn't answer right away. But when she picked up the phone and heard the voice of her eldest daughter, she could hear that she was genuinely happy. She surprised her daughter. "Vanessa said that you are on sick leave." "Oh," under the ball also cheerfully answered the mother. A couple of sneezes, and she has already panicked. "Mom, is it something serious?" "Don't worry, I'm fine. Why don't you tell me what's new with you? When do you plan to come back?" "Not for a while. The work here is just getting better. I don't think we'll be fully operational until 6 months from now. Mark got a job. Well, he's been moonlighting here and there." Maria was floundering. "I see. So he didn't get a job. Oh, daughter, I have to go. My mother was in an unexpected hurry." Sorry, not missing," she said and quickly hung up the phone. Evelyn listened to the short beeps for a while longer and looked at the cell phone, not understanding anything. This conversation seemed strange to her. Usually her mother was always dissatisfied, but here she was chirping cheerfully. 6 months flew by for Evelyn like a day, and the work in the branch was established. After the inspection, the bosses were not stingy with compliments. Evelyn was proud of you and her team. On top of that, she had a man in her life. They met Nick at the center. He worked as an ambulance doctor and once came to a call. He saw an elderly woman who had been beaten up. She refused to be hospitalized, but she was too scared to stay at home. "Do you think this is the first time he's beaten me?" She confessed to the doctor. "I'm used to both of them. But this is the first time I've seen him this angry." Maybe the doctor suggested the police. "Oh, no. What are you doing?" The woman was scared. "He'll do time and come back. Then I'll be dead for sure. So why are you with him?" The man didn't understand. Where to go? No children, no family, no friends. This Herod took everyone away. Nick felt genuinely sorry for the old woman, and he suggested that she go to the new center for helping people. Not immediately, but still she agreed. Nick drove her himself and put her in Evelyn's hands. And then several more times he stopped by the center and was interested in the well-being of his ward. The young people's working relationship quickly turned into sympathy. A month after their first meeting, Nick introduced Evelyn to his parents. Despite the fact that Nick and Evelyn were almost the same age, his parents were quite old. Intelligent, courteous, pleasant to be around. They reminded Evelyn of his grandparents, and from that day on, she became a frequent visitor to their house. "When are you going home?" I asked Nick. "Tomorrow morning." The young man's eyes immediately became sad. "I'll be waiting for your return. I will quickly come to settle everything with the documents. Come back." The lovers could not part for a long time. They stood in silence and held hands. And the next day, close to lunchtime, Evelyn already reached home. Closing the door behind her, she gloried against the wall and remembered with pleasure the happy moments of life in this apartment. When her grandparents were still alive, her memories were interrupted by the phone ringing. "Yes, I'm listening," she answered. "Hello, sis." Vanessa's familiar voice sounded. "Are you back already?" "Yes, I'm home." After a little silence, Vanessa said into the phone, "I didn't want to tell you this, but you're going to find out anyway. Mom's in the hospital. Let's meet her off the phone. I'm going to visit her this afternoon. You're coming with me." To settle the formalities of transferring to the hometown to be the director of the help center, Evelyn met with her sister. After much hesitation, Vanessa confessed, "My dad beat up my mom. She's lying there with a concussion and 2 more broken ribs. That's not counting the bruises, contusions, and abrasions. And I'm guessing it's not the first time. Evelyn guessed. Well, yes, she'd been on sick leave a few times, so she wouldn't have to go to work with bruises. But this was her first time in the hospital. Why didn't you say anything? My mom asked me to. We filed a police report. No, that mom doesn't even want to hear about it. A nurse stopped the girls at the checkpoint. It's not allowed for two. You go. Vanessa suggested and handed her sister a robe. When Maria saw her eldest daughter, she cried. Evelyn's heart squeezed. The always indifferent, always disgruntled, stern woman now looked like a wounded bird. Evelyn wanted to hug her, to hold her close, to pity her and promise that everything would get better. But she held back. She sat down next to her on the bed. The young woman inquired, "How are you feeling?" "Well, I'm fine now," the mother replied, wiping away her tears. "Maybe you can tell me what happened." Maria silently turned away to the window. Tears flowed from her eyes again. She was ashamed to admit to her daughter what had happened. "Mom, I can help you," Evelyn said, "but you have to want to." Maria remained silent, swallowing her tears. "Mom, why did Mark do it? He's been drinking lately." Finally, her mother spoke, and it was taking a lot of money. "And my salary is not much. So when I turned him down, he beat me. And this time, Mark brought his drinking buddies and I refused to set the table for them. Why do you put up with it? You could leave him and live in peace. Go to the police. Don't you want to tell me you love him?" "I'm afraid of him," Maria confessed. "I'm very afraid of him. He will never leave me alone." "Let's make a report to the police first," suggested Evelyn. "No. What are you afraid of, Maria? You can't even imagine how this will end. What can he do? Have you forgotten where I work? And Mom, I listen to stories like this every day, and I know for a fact that if you sit back and take it, nothing good will come of it. Either we get him out of your life, or I'm leaving, and I'm never going to help you with this again." Maria thought for a moment, and then whispered, "Okay, I'll do as you say." Upon learning of the statement, Mark came to his wife to confess. He swore and swore that it would never happen again, that he would work and stop drinking. But Maria, on the advice of her daughter, was adamant. After his wife's refusal, Mark instantly became furious. Losing control of himself, he began to shout and threaten to kick her out of the house. The guards chased the man out of the hospital and, at Evelyn's request, informed her of the incident. In the evening, she went to her stepfather's house after hearing all of his threats against her. Evelyn pulled out her phone and turned on the voice recorder, which was perfectly audible. "I'll pass this on." In a calm tone of voice, she said, "And if you try to carry out any of your threats, you'll go to jail for a long time. I've made sure of that. What do you want?" Mark asked when he realized he was trapped. "Mom's being discharged soon," Evelyn replied. "She needs to rest. That's why you have 3 days to move out." "Yeah, sure," grinned the stepmother. "Look for the fool. I'm as much the boss here as she is." "You forgot about Vanessa and me," Evelyn replied. "You don't seem to care enough. So you've got 2 apartments. None of your business. You had nothing to do with my apartment or this one. You didn't put a dime into it. What's the difference? It's the law. The laws I know. It's jointly acquired property and will be divided equally. That's if you don't get locked up before you divide it." Evelyn smiled. "What do you want from me?" Peace March asked again. "You get out of here, and Mom will take a statement from the police. But I have nowhere to go," Evelyn said, very confused. "As far as I know, you have a lot of friends." "Igor first, Evelyn. Ask them if they'll take you in." In the end, Evelyn, together with a lawyer from the help center, helped her mother divorce Mark and kick him out of the apartment. He spent a long time looking for arguments in his favor, but his stepdaughter's threats to put him in jail were more convincing. Having collected his things, he left on his return home. Maria took a long time to get used to the fact that she was the only one who owned the place. She also needed psychological counseling, and more than one to get away from the stress. Evelyn helped her mother as much as she could. It seemed to her that during this period they had become closer than they had been in their entire lives. Her mother was genuinely happy every time her daughters came to visit. And soon Vanessa announced that she too would soon become a mother. And Maria was worried about her studies. It's no big deal. I'll take a leave of absence. In the hustle and bustle of daily life, Evelyn never got around to telling her family about Nick, despite the fact that they chatted at length on the phone every day. The man was looking forward to seeing them, but he wasn't being let go from his job, as there was a staff shortage. Evelyn had not been able to make it. Well, I can't leave my mom right now. She hasn't fully come to her senses yet, she explained. Then one day Maria invited her eldest daughter for a walk. Lately they often walked together, discussing the news. Talking about distracted topics, Maria said, "Olga, I thought long and hard and came to the conclusion that I want to give Vanessa my apartment. After all, she and James are going to have a baby soon. They just need a permanent place to live. Yeah, it's your apartment. Then you can do whatever you want with it." Her daughter agreed. Evelyn wasn't going to claim her mother's place, but she felt bad that her mother didn't even think about it. Well, just for decency's sake. After all, she had her share of the apartment. "Yes, you're right," nodded her mother. "Vanessa will probably be pleased. But you know what I don't really want." Evelyn looked at her mother questioningly. "I don't want to be a free appendix in this apartment." "What do you mean by that?" The daughter didn't understand. "A young family should live separately," Maria explained. "Maybe I can live in your apartment." Evelyn was not surprised by her mother's question. Perhaps she had expected it and was somewhat upset. It seemed to Evelyn that her mother had fully realized her mistakes and was doing her best to correct them. But as soon as she recovered from the divorce, she was back to her old ways. Under different circumstances, Evelyn probably would have given her mother permission. But now her resentment for her spoiled childhood, for her mother's lack of love and affection, flared up in her with renewed vigor. She turned away so that her mother would not see her weakness and said, "I'm sorry, but I have other plans for my apartments. I need them." "What other plans?" I got angry. "Maria, you wouldn't dare leave your mother on the street. I dare to remind, not long ago, I already helped you not to stay on the street," answered Evelyn, turning around and looking into her mother's eyes. "And I did everything possible and impossible then. And if today you've got it in your head to give the apartment to someone else, I don't hold it against you. That's your right. But it's not my fault." "Well, first of all, it wasn't someone. It was your sister, Maria. And secondly, I didn't ask for help. You're the one who got involved with Mark. You're the one who pushed for our divorce and then kicked him out." Evelyn was horrified by those words. All her phantom hopes for their rapprochement and warming relationship had crumbled like a house of cards. She wanted to scream and cry herself to tears. But Evelyn, clenching her will into a fist, calmly said, "I thought you didn't mind getting rid of that drunkard and tyrant. Who asked you to think at all?" The mother parried. "Before you came here, I had a husband who loved me. And beat me out of love, I suppose," added Evelyn. "Yes, there were disagreements between us, but like everyone else." Ignoring her daughter's words, Evelyn continued, "How would you really know? You don't have a family." Her mother's last sentence caused Evelyn great heartache. Like a hurt little girl, she wanted to hurt her abuser too. "So whose credit is it that I didn't have a family?" she shouted out, barely holding back the tears that were choking her. "My family is my grandparents. It was they who showed me what it should be without humiliation, without scandals and manhandling, where people love, respect, and appreciate each other." After listening to her daughter, the mother cooled down a bit. She tried to justify herself. It came out rather awkwardly. The woman was either reading something, but Evelyn couldn't hear her. "While I believed I was helping you get rid of a tyrant husband, you've been plotting to get your hands on my inheritance," she suggested. "And you know what I'm gonna tell you. Mommy, I have a fiancé. His name is Nick, and he's an EMT. We're getting married soon. He's got a job in DC, and I'm gonna transfer to his new branch of the Metropolitan Care Center. And if everything works out, we'll sell these apartments to buy one in DC. Any other questions for me?" Maria stood with a confused look and didn't know what to say to her daughter. She just remained silent, looking at her and batting her eyelashes, and all we could say was, "We're going to stay here." "Are we staying here?" "Yes." "Imagine, we each have our own lives." Evelyn answered and turned around and walked away from her mother. And the next morning at exactly 6:00 a.m., her cell phone was ringing off the hook. "Evelyn, I understand your mother correctly. You decided to kick us out on the street." Territory. Little sister into the phone. "What are you talking about?" "Me. I don't understand," Evelyn clarified. I didn't quite understand exactly what she was talking about. "My mom told me," Vanessa replied, "that you're moving to Washington and selling all your apartments." "That's true." "Well, most likely," Evelyn agreed, gradually moving away from the basics. "When were you planning to tell me?" Suddenly shouted Vanessa. "You know my situation. I'm not allowed to be nervous or anxious. And you didn't even deign to inform me that Serioja and I would soon be homeless. I think you're being a little dramatic." "Sis." Evelyn tried to calm her down. "Sis?" Vanessa asked her again. "Yeah, a real sister wouldn't do something like that. You know very well that we have no place to live. First you invited us here, and now you want to send us away like dogs. What about selling the apartment? Don't you think that's despicable?" Evelyn was finally waking up to her sister's attacks. She was uncomfortable with the tone in which Vanessa was speaking to her. "I take it this is in lieu of a thank you," she clarified. "I'd like to remind you that I called you in temporarily, not permanently. You and James wanted a loan. Isn't that right? I just wanted you to keep your rent down." "What mortgage are you talking about?" Was Vanessa nervous? "Yeah, we're struggling to make ends meet. James has time to study and work, but his salary leaves a lot to be desired. We can't even go to the movies, let alone make a big purchase. But I guess you'll have to move in with your mom." Evelyn suggested it. "I don't think she'd mind. I'm sure she would." And Vanessa said, "Unlike you, my mom doesn't spare anything for me. She wanted to give me her apartment, but you ruined it." "And how did she do that?" "Let me ask you something. Your selfishness." Vanessa was going, and she couldn't stop. "You've been spoiled since you were a kid. You're used to everyone dancing around you. You want to study, get an apartment. You want an apartment for another one. And how do other people cope? Didn't you care?" Evelyn, listening to her sister, couldn't stop wondering if her mother was so acutely ill. Vanessa couldn't have changed so much. After all, for so many years she had been an attentive, loving sister. What happened? Pretending. Thoughts swarmed through her head. Evelyn listened to the profanity and tears streamed down her cheeks. Everything she believed in and aspired to was crumbling before her eyes. The people who were closest to her had betrayed her once again. Evelyn had no desire to prove or explain anything. Taking a deep breath, she wiped away her tears and said in as calm a tone as possible, "I'm sorry, sister, that I'm not what you wanted me to be, but mine will continue to be mine." "And yours?" "Yours?" And she immediately dropped the call. The clock read 600 am. There was a ringing silence. The city was slowly waking up. Evelyn kept replaying Vanessa's words in her head. Everything swam before her eyes, and she wanted to scream, but her strength was gone. Tears streamed down her face, and her heart was beating as hard as if it wanted to jump out of her chest. Evelyn was pulled out of her daze by the phone ringing. The name Nick popped up on the screen. Shaking her head, and to bring herself to her senses, she answered the call. "Good morning, beloved." The young man said cheerfully hello. "I hope I didn't wake you up. I have some good news." "Good morning to you too, Nick," Evelyn replied, trying not to show her distressed state. "I'm awake now. Did something happen to you? You've been crying." "No, I'm fine. Just a little cold. But it's really bad timing," Nick lamented. and I finally settled on a transfer. He starts his new assignment in a week. I wanted to see you. You're welcome to come. I'd love to. Well, then I'll pack all my things not to return and come to you, said Nick. And you don't shell out. Drink tea with raspberries. Believe me, I'll be as good as new by the time you arrive. 2 days later, she met Nick at the train station. The man was glowing in part. Dropping his suitcase, he ran up to Evelyn, and taking her in his arms, began circling her in place. At last we are together. He rejoiced. Every day, Nick brought his favorite breakfast in bed and greeted her with a hot dinner from work. While Evelyn was away, he fixed the faucets that had long been poking up, changed the hinges in the kitchen cabinets, hung the portrait of her with her grandparents that had been on the table for several years, sent against the wall. In short, redid all the man's chores. In the presence of Nick, Evelyn felt happy and loved. The week flew by like a single day. On the eve of departure, Nick and Evelyn took a day off. In the morning, the lovers did not live in bed for a long time. And then, while the young man went to the train station for tickets, the hostess prepared a delicious lunch. Having bolstered life, they decided to take a walk around the city. Holding hands like schoolchildren, Nick and Evelyn slowly shaved through the park, enjoying the fresh, frosty air. They were warm and cozy with each other. The time flew by. Nick invited Evelyn to the restaurant for dinner. A glass of wine, light appetizers, romantic ambience, quiet, peaceful music. Everything contributed to making this an unforgettable evening. Nick took Evelyn's hand and looked intently into her eyes. "Will you marry me?" Suddenly he asked, and taking advantage of the girl's interference, pulled a ring box out of his pocket. At that moment, Evelyn's heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She had been waiting for Nick's marriage proposal for a long time and was ready to accept it. But she had no idea that this moment would be so exciting for her. She happily replied and extended her hand to the young man. Soon Nick left for the capital, and Evelyn stayed in her city to wait for a transfer to another branch. Having seen off her fiancé, she plunged headlong into work. Being preoccupied with other people's problems, the woman forgot about her own. Firmly decided for himself not to dig into the past and leave in relations with his mother and sister, everything as it is, she calmed down and got on with her life, accepting the marriage proposal. Evelyn asked Nick to dispense with the lavish celebrations. The bride and groom agreed to get married at a Washington, D.C. registry office after Evelyn's relocation was resolved. By that time, Nick promised to settle the question of rent. Spring was in full swing. Nature was leaving its winter hibernation, and the riot of colors around created a joyful mood. The Gulf, birds singing on different voices, made hearts flutter. To top it all off, Evelyn was waiting for her transfer to Washington, and she couldn't wait to see her beloved. Nick, as promised, prepared everything for the bride's arrival. He rented an apartment for the first time, adjusted the household, studied the real estate market. And so the long-awaited day came. Evelyn gathered all the things necessary for the first time. She made an agreement with a realtor about selling her apartment and set out for a new life. All along the way, she thought about the last conversation she'd had with her mother and sister. "You are a bad daughter," showered her mother with accusations ungrateful. "I gave you life. How could I take care of you? Yeah, you went to live with your grandparents. But that was your decision, and I didn't kick you out. It's not my fault you couldn't get along with Mark. I didn't have to be alone for the rest of my life because of you. I was too young when I was widowed, and I needed a man. And you know, not everyone would take in a child, and Mark took you in. And you kicked him out of the house. You always made sure I was lonely because you're selfish. I don't think anyone needs him but you," Evelyn replied. "If he whistles, he'll come running. You have no right to insult him. He's my father." Vanessa stood up for him. "I've always loved you and respected you as a big sister. You've been my role model. But I didn't think any apartment would come between us. Nor did I expect the price of your love to be an apartment," Evelyn argued. You're ungrateful. Vanessa echoed her mother's accusations. For you, material things were more important than family ties. That's not true, Evelyn replied. I never stopped loving you. But you, when you learned that there would be no division of my inheritance, quickly abandoned me. Maria and Vanessa proved Evelyn and her wrong for a long time, trying to press on pity and conscience. But their arguments did not work on Evelyn, giving them a chance to speak. She walked away with the words, I will not allow myself to be manipulated, but I think the grandparents foresaw this situation, so they disposed of their property this way and not the other way around. If you can't be happy for me along with me, I won't bother your eyes and will leave. I don't want anything from you, but I don't owe you anything either. Do you have a husband? She turned to her sister, so earn your own apartment. And if you can't, ask your father for help. In a new place, Evelyn settled in quickly. The team was new and young. There was a lot of active work, but Evelyn always got home on time. She gave herself the attitude that family was the most important thing in her life. The appointed date of the first day of summer Nick and Evelyn signed. As agreed, they did not invite guests to their first family party, deciding that it was just for the two of them. It was Maria and Vanessa, and still there was no word. But the realtor found buyers for the apartments to resolve the sale. She took 2 weeks of unpaid leave and went to her hometown to settle the formalities. Evelyn was about to return, but before leaving she decided to visit her relatives. Approaching her mother's house, she saw her sitting on a bench in the yard. It had only been 6 months since they had last seen each other, but it seemed to Evelyn that she had aged a lot in that time. Maria sat alone and concentrated, staring at one point in front of her. Sadness and longing were imprinted on her face, barely noticeable. The wrinkles before had become deep. At the sight of Evelyn's mother, everything squeezed inside. In that moment, she wanted to hug her and feel sorry for her, maybe even apologize for what she'd said in the heat of the moment. On impulse, Evelyn rushed to her mother's side. But at that moment, Mark came out of the driveway. When she saw him, she quickly got up and followed. Evelyn stopped, seeing off her mother and stepmother. She experienced a gamut of feelings, pain from another betrayal, anger, self-pity. Barely holding back tears, she turned and ran back. But at that moment, she heard a familiar voice calling her. Evelyn, it's you. The girl stopped and, turning her head, saw her sister with a bag in her hands. And despite her exhausted rhythm, she looked more beautiful. Pregnancy was in her face, flipping from foot to foot. As Vanessa jokingly approached Evelyn, how long ago did this arrive? She asked, as if nothing had happened. 2 weeks ago. It's a long time. I'm leaving today, and I've come to take care of some business. Vanessa was silent, trying to formulate a question. Yes, I just wanted to stop by and say goodbye before I left, Evelyn explained. But no one was home. You must have missed your mom, Vanessa suggested. She was getting ready. The girl was silent again, clearly not saying the right thing. To leave. Is everything all right? Yeah, I'm fine. Then I'll go, Evelyn said and turned around. Why don't you come over for a visit? Vanessa asked in an uncertain tone. Not tonight. Some other time, Evelyn promised, and started to go on her way. But her sister called out to her again. Evelyn turned around and saw Vanessa's guilty face. Evelyn. She addressed her sister as before. I'm sorry for what I said to you the other day. You know, hormones. Don't hold it against me. I don't know what came over me, but you're right. I had nothing to do with your inheritance. You're the only heir to your dad and his parents. Yeah, I wasn't so lucky with my dad. He never thought about me. He's lived his whole life and continues to live only for himself. What did my mom see in him? Don't worry, Evelyn reassured her. I'm not mad at you. I understand. Everyone can make mistakes. The main thing is to realize it in time and repent. Evelyn walked over to Vanessa and hugged her, pulling her close to her sister. She felt a push in her stomach and bounced away. Vasileva smiled and put a hand on her tummy. and said, "Well, they're from the tribe," and met. The girls both laughed. After the conversation with her sister, Evelyn felt as if a mountain had fallen from her shoulders. The only thing that kept her thinking was, had her mother really gotten back together with Mark? Had she forgiven him? Evelyn hesitated to ask Vanessa. She was afraid to break the fragile peace that had formed between them during their last meeting. Why would you even want that information? I don't understand. Nick also asked. If your mom is fine with it, then you shouldn't even care. You know, Nick, whatever she is, she's my mother, and I can't live with that monster around. Evelyn justified herself. What if he hits her again? But you can't stop your mother from talking to him. It's her choice. You're right, I agree. Evelyn, sighing heavily. And then there's your sister. I don't think she'll let you hurt her mother, Nick said before leaving. Then, turning the key in the lock, he kissed his wife on the cheek and disappeared out the door. Evelyn thought about it for a while longer, but gradually everyday tasks distracted her from the bad thoughts. She plunged headlong into her work. On weekends, the newlyweds traveled from morning to evening to look at apartments. They decided not to hurry with the choice, especially since Nick's apartment was not for sale. On the secondary market, nothing suitable for our money. Disappointed, said Evelyn, returning from another viewing. Maybe we should look at new buildings, Nick suggested. They have lower prices. Yes, but we don't know when the house will be finished, and then we'll have to make repairs. You need a lot of money for that too. So it's better to make repairs again than to redo them. With optimism in his voice, said Nick. The next weekend it was decided to look at apartments in houses under construction. After waiting for the end of the work week, the couple were going to the construction company when Evelyn's phone rang. Hi, sis. She said hello cheerfully, answering the call. However, James' voice came out of the receiver. Evelyn, it's not Vanessa, he said. It's James. Something's happened. Evelyn immediately worried. No, don't worry. I said, I'm just calling to let you know you've become an aunt. Our daughter Vanessa was born while she's sleeping, so I thought I'd let you know. Congratulations, shouted Evelyn happily. And maybe you can come visit us too, James asked. I can't yet at work, she explained. But I'll try to come by New Year's Eve, just as my niece will grow up and get stronger by then. After saying goodbye to her sister's husband, Evelyn told Nick the good news, but she noticed that he reacted a little too calmly, even indifferently. I realize that they're strangers to you, of course, but you could have been happy for me. With resentment in her voice, Evelyn expressed her displeasure. I'm glad, Nick replied. It's just that I think it's time for me to meet your family. It just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. We've been married for 3 months, and your mother and sister still don't know. Yeah, you're right about that. But you know how complicated my relationship with them is. Evelyn tried to justify herself. But I promised to make it up to them. We'll go there together in the winter. I'll look at some more apartments in new buildings. The newlyweds chose one. The most like the new neighborhood and all the necessary infrastructure. Constructed yards are arranged for recreation for children and adults. Listed Evelyn. Pluses of this object. Even the metro station is planned to open in walking distance, and a large selection of apartments with different layouts and on different floors, added Nick. And from the window you can see a small pond. Evelyn perked up. I like everything and the price. The price is reasonable for us. Nick. Yes. But if my apartment was sold, we could buy a 2-bedroom in this house. Nick was disappointed. You know, the important thing is to start somewhere. His wife encouraged him. I've got enough money for a 1-bedroom. It's better than renting. Well, yes, you're right. The husband agreed, but his tone was still upset. But don't get me wrong. I've never lived off a woman. And now I do not want you to think that I need your apartment. What kind of nonsense is that? Evelyn was indignant. You and I are husband and wife. It's not nonsense. Nick continued. This question is very important to me. What are you trying to tell me? I just think that if you happen to be buying this apartment, you should have it registered in your name. What's more, I'm proposing a prenuptial agreement." Evelyn looked at her husband, trying to understand whether he was serious or joking. But there was not a muscle on Nick's face. He was determined. "Well, all right," she agreed. "If you insist. Yes, I want my woman to be sure of me at all times. I love you, my knights," Evelyn said with a smile and hugged her husband. "Congratulations to you, Evelyn," said the representative of the man in suit and tie, handing the new keys to the same person. "You are now the full owner of a one-bedroom apartment with finishes." "Thank you," replied Evelyn, and not hiding joy, looked at the people standing on the playground of future neighbors. Keys in a solemn atmosphere handed to all present owners of apartments. Then on the same playground, the developer organized a small amateur concert. And in the evening, Evelyn and Nick Happy returned home and discussed their move to a new apartment. During the conversation, they didn't immediately hear the phone ringing from Nick's jacket pocket, but the caller was persistent. Looking at the screen and seeing an unfamiliar number, Nick was surprised and answered the call. "Hello. Yes, this is me selling. I'll be able to drive up next weekend." "Yeah, okay, you got a deal," and dropped the call. Nick grumbled unhappily. About time. Had there really been a buyer for the apartment? Evelyn guessed. "I think I'm the only one who's found one. What are we going to do with him now? We could have bought that bigger apartment a month earlier, and now we can't sell the new one. Why don't we just not sell your apartment yet?" Evelyn suggested it. "Let it stand." "No, I don't think so. We'll be looking for a buyer for 6 months. As long as there's someone willing to buy it, we have to see it through." "The boss is the boss," shrugged his shoulders, replied Evelyn. And the next weekend, Nick went to his city, and Evelyn, not knowing what to do, walked from corner to corner. And then the phone rang. "Hi," Sis said hello to Evelyn, answering the call. "Hi, Evelyn," said Vanessa, without much joy in her voice. "What's up? What are you doing?" "Yes? I'm thinking about moving to a new apartment. Why are you so sad? Did something happen? I don't know where to start. I got stuck. My sister, Mom, and Dad. Anyway, they're back together. I don't want him to come home. We're too cramped as it is. Dad got a house in the country from his parents, but Mom doesn't want to leave town. Why don't you talk to her?" "Oh no, I'm not getting involved in your business. I've already given up my share of the apartment. We'll take it from here." "Evelyn, what about you? You're definitely not going to claim it?" Vanessa asked. "No, I'm not." "Thanks, Sis, you're better than that." With all matters settled in his hometown, Nick returned home satisfied and said to Evelyn, "I propose to buy a plot of land in the suburbs and gradually build a summer house. What do you think about it?" "I think it's a very good idea." Surprisingly, such a plot of land was found very quickly. And on New Year's Eve, the happy newlyweds went to visit Vanessa and Sergei. Hospitable, the hosts gladly painted the gifts brought by her sister and her husband. Evelyn was getting acquainted with her niece, and Vanessa was jokingly indignant. Here was my sister getting married and not even telling anyone. And when the first passions subsided, Evelyn asked, "Where's Mom?" "She moved in with her father," Vanessa answered dryly. The older sister did not pursue the subject further. The New Year's Eve party turned out to be fun. James Nick. Despite the difference in age, they quickly found a common language. And on the eve of returning home, Evelyn asked her sister, "Have you seen your mom for a long time?" "I haven't seen her since she moved," Vanessa answered, and added that if she doesn't call her, it means she's doing well. Evelyn was a little surprised by her sister's answer, but she remained silent. On the day of the guest's departure, Vanessa received a call from her mother. "Daughter, can I come to you?" Swallowing tears, she asked, "What happened?" "Father, I guess I was wrong to contact him again." "Yes, come over, of course," Vanessa invited in a disgruntled tone. "But only in your former room. Our bedrooms now." "Oh, thank you, Vanessa Sushko," rejoiced mother, not paying attention to the warning. "I'm already near the house. I'll be right in." A minute later, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood the mother, and seeing the eldest daughter, she fussed, and fixing with her hand the hair that was under the cap, thus covering her eye, said hello. Evelyn noticed a bruise on her mother's face, carefully covered with total cream. "Happy holidays, Mom," Evelyn said, hesitating to go up to her and hug her. "Meet my husband, Nick, and this is my mom." Maria introduced herself and extended her hand to her son-in-law. "I didn't expect you to marry such a handsome man," she said to her daughter. "But why do you have a beautiful daughter, smart and handsome?" "Yes, she got that from me," Maria said coquettishly. "Oh, why are we standing at the threshold? Why don't we sit down and celebrate?" "No, we should get back," said Evelyn. "It was nice to see you. Come visit. Vanessa invited us. Would you like to come?" Nick replied. After the meeting with Evelyn's mother, she felt bad. All the way she was silent. Understanding his wife's mood, Nick did not bother her. And later, from a phone conversation with her sister, Evelyn learned that contacted her father, Alina, addicted to alcohol. And as soon as they get drunk, they start to find out about each other. Vanessa complained. Scolding turns into fighting. "That's why I didn't want my father to move back in. Why didn't you tell me before?" Evelyn asked. "What difference would it have made? Evelyn, you already helped Mom out once. Where's the gratitude? She blames you even more for ruining her family." Evelyn was hurt to hear those words, but she was used to her mother's attitude. "I persuaded her to stay, but she decided to go back to her father," Vanessa continued. "And when I forbade him to cross the threshold of our house, she signed the apartment over to me in solidarity with him and slammed the door loudly. As you could see, their relationship lasted a little over a month. And now she's living with you." "No. A week after you left, her father came for her and persuaded her to come back to him without her realizing it," Evelyn said with genuine regret. "Why should she be so nervous in her old age? Maybe she needs medical attention." "No, I don't think so. I don't think she'd want medical attention." 5 years have passed since then. The sisters still called each other, occasionally visiting. Nick and Evelyn gradually built a house, a sauna, and a gazebo on their country estate. "Our country house is not for work, but for relaxation," Evelyn said. And indeed, on every holiday, and just on weekends, they often went out of town, inviting friends to visit. Once, after a telephone conversation with his mother, Nick asked his wife Evelyn, "Would you mind if I brought my parents to our country house? They're in poor health. They'll be closer to us here." "Evelyn, since the day I met her, I've had a great relationship with my mother-in-law and mother-in-law." That's why she immediately agreed to her husband's proposal. And on the next weekend, the spouses went to Nick's parents and offered them to move into their house. "But what about our apartment?" Mother hesitated. "And what will happen to her?" asked Nick. "Let it stand she does not ask for bread." After a little thought, the parents agreed. And soon they were already living at the dacha of their son and daughter-in-law, and rejoiced that now they had the opportunity to spend more time in the fresh air. Evelyn was pleased to see the old people happy. She loved secrets with her mother-in-law, as she had once done as a child with her grandmother. Nick's mother was an intelligent woman and tried to stay out of their lives. But there was one question she couldn't stop asking. "Evelyn, why don't you and Nick have children?" she asked one day. "I'd like to have grandchildren in my old age." It was a question that had been on her mind for years. She and her husband dreamed of having children. They examined different doctors, took prescribed medications, but everything was useless. Everyone said, "You're both healthy. Maybe there's an incompatibility between you." And no one could tell you what to do about it. Evelyn had given up hope of becoming a mother. And once in a conversation with her husband, she even suggested that he break up with her and find another woman who could bear him a child. But Nick was outraged when he heard about it. "Never, you hear, never suggesting that I break up with you. I love you and I wouldn't trade you for any other woman. If God doesn't give us children, then we'll live together and enjoy each other's company." Evelyn and Nick never returned to the subject again. They seemed resigned to their fate. But when Evelyn heard the question of children from the people around them, from those around her, and she felt uneasy. Vanessa and Serioja had another daughter. They were happily married, but Vanessa had little contact with her mother. Evelyn, having buried Mark, who was stabbed to death by a neighbor in a drunken brawl, was left to live in his house. She asked to go to her youngest daughter's house, but Vanessa didn't want to take her in. I don't think she will be a good example for her granddaughters. The woman explained her decision. I don't want any drunkenness here. Evelyn and her husband came to Maria several times, offering to help, to fix up the house that was almost falling apart. But the mother did not accept any help from her eldest daughter. She abandoned us years ago and went to her Washington, D.C., taking all her money. So go there. She yelled at her. I don't want anything more from you. When I asked you, you didn't want to share. Now get the fuck out of here. Forget you have a mother. You're ungrateful. I raised you alone without a father, and you ruined my family. You kicked my husband out. Vanessa left you. I didn't abandon anyone. Evelyn tried to justify herself. You're the one who threw me out of your life like an unwanted kitten. After Grandma and Grandpa died, I was floundering on my own. Well, you're just going to keep on floundering. Don't mess with me. I have someone to take care of me. Vanessa has always loved me, unlike you. Yeah, that's why you live here in this shack. Out of spite, Evelyn said. It's none of your business. I can live where I want. Get out of my house, shouted after and running daughters Maria. Having become an unhappy witness of the last scandal, Nick forbade Evelyn to go to her mother. And Evelyn herself lost the last desire to visit this woman. 6 months after moving to the country house, of his son, Nick's father died. The mother was very worried, but tried to hold on. After consultation, the spouses moved her to their apartment. Cramped, but not in offense, said Nick. Don't join us, said the wife. We have a one-room apartment, but it's big. Well, now that I settled in, as Mom said, why should our apartment be idle? Let's sell it and exchange it for a 2- or 3-room apartment. A year later, the couple celebrated a housewarming party in a spacious 3-room apartment. That day, the house was full of guests, Vanessa and James. With their daughters came to congratulate relatives. Friends brought a lot of gifts. The holiday was a success. Evelyn and her mother-in-law set a sumptuous table, and everyone was satisfied. And in the evening, after seeing his friends off, Nick took his relatives to the country house. They wished to stay with them for a few days. Evelyn and her mother-in-law were clearing the table when she felt very bad. Nick's frightened mother called an ambulance and called her son. By the time he returned, a doctor was already sitting near Evelyn. Seeing Nick, she said hello to him and smiled and said, "Congratulations, colleague, you're about to become a daddy. And you, mommy, do you need to take care of yourself?" She turned to Evelyn. "In the next few months, you should not have any excitement or overexertion.